sudden it was Friday.
They just keep going faster.
I know. But yeah, it was good. Yeah. Morning.
Morning. Happy Saturday to you.
Happy Saturday.
I'm doing well, and you?
Tomorrow Saturday.
Yeah. Sometimes you just need a little more power. No, not this week. It feels as if that was the case. Didn't feed one of the dogs. Dan had to leave before I did this morning, and he did feed the dogs, except for one of them's kind of picky.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Doesn't like to eat, but then the other one will eat.
Yeah, that's the same thing as I
But we
said.
have a tiny dog, and he eats the big dog's food.
Yeah.
The big dog don't eat it.
Our big dog just doesn't care.
Right.
So I fed her, and he takes forever. He has to stand over her.
Oh, do we need to lower the? Do we need to lower the screen?
So it's like, I don't have time for that.
That's funny.
Yeah, they are very funny.
We just, he generally will come and tell us when he's hungry.
Yeah.
Dan makes
Yeah.
it, puts it up on the counter. Because if you leave it down, he'll eat it, and
I
he
know.
can't afford all that food.
It's the same
With the cold rain though this week, I'm still thawing.
Oh, really?
You know, it is so fun that a raincoat popped up on Facebook.
We have kept
I swear.
his food.
I swear the phone is recording your
About 2
voice
months
because it
now.
said I need a raincoat.
Freddie has lost about 5
It is a little scary.
Not leaving it down.
Popped up
Yeah.
last night.
They're funny.
Yep.
Big Brother's was. No. No, I did not.
All set. Thank you, though.
All right, I think we're all here. Welcome to the Englewood City Council Budget Workshop meeting this May 11th bright morning at 8 a.m. Thank you to all the staff who are here, who are going to help this morning in presenting, and for the great work that has been put into this PowerPoint. I think the plan this morning is to actually have the presentations but not have us interrupt with questions. Is that right? Until you give question time. Is that correct? All right. So first up this morning is Maria Sabata, our Director of Finance, to help us kind of walk through this great workshop. Take it away.
Good morning, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning in our ongoing budget discussions. We really appreciate it as a team. So I want to let you know what we'll be covering today. Can everybody hear me okay, first and foremost? Yes? So today we're going to be reviewing preliminary 2020 operational and capital requests. Each department will have an opportunity to review with you changes to their priorities and initiatives They'll review their operational requests, including any staffing changes or program service level changes, and we'll also be reviewing capital requests. This is not a line item budget. We're going to be developing the line item budget based on the direction that you share with us after looking at the requests. So we'll continue to build those throughout the next several months. It is a review, again, for each department to be able to talk about those changes that they're recommending for their budgets. I also wanted to mention that when we review the capital requests, some of this information has been shared in previous sessions in March and April. So I think repetition is good because we are able to share updates with you, but then also share information with you that's been shared in the past. So if you've developed questions, we can answer those at the end. I also wanted to mention that in the appendix, there's a lot of information that we use pieces of throughout the presentation, but a lot of the details are in the appendix. So please look at that if you haven't already. And then I also wanted to make sure that I mentioned that, you know, the capital budget really does feed into our operational budget requests. They feed on each other. So decisions that we make regarding capital will also, or that you make regarding capital, will drive forward to those operational budgets as well. And at the mayor's request, next week we will attach to the minutes the 2019 line item budget for your review. And also through the budgeting process, as we get towards the end, we'll also be sharing the 2020 line item budget with you as well. Okay? And one more thing, just we had some animation, or I do have some animation in this presentation as I have in the past. And so some of the slides that you've seen in the deck were combined because you can't really print them out separately. So when I get to those slides, I'll make sure you know so that you're looking at the slides specific on the screen. Okay? All right, so here is a calendar that I know you are becoming very familiar with, and we've completed the following checkpoints throughout Q1 and Q2 related to the budget, and today, of course, is our proposed operational and capital requests. We have in Q2 left the Planning and Zoning Commission capital improvement list will go to the CMO on June 8th, but as you'll see, we really don't have anything scheduled to come back to you with until August 5th because the staff will be developing those line item budgets based on your comments and questions today and direction. The one thing that we would like to ask, if you would like, and we'll talk about this at the end, so I'll ask you to think about it, because we don't have specific meetings scheduled, would it be appropriate for the council to submit questions to me that I will share with everyone and to the public with responses related to the budget, because this is a lot of information to share with you today. And so at the end of this presentation, we can talk about how best to move forward with information sharing for the 2020 budgeting process, okay? All right. So today, I'll be giving a brief introduction with Dorothy, and then the department directors will give their budget overviews. We'll take a short break, and we'll spend the second half really talking about the capital and looking for your feedback related to all of the information that's being shared with you today. And we'll leave some time at the end for closing remarks and any next steps that you'd like us to take. Okay. All right. So we'll start with my first animation, Jane Q. Public. You know, a citizen in Englewood really takes a lot of advantage of many services and activities in Englewood, including the fire and police department, and of course our infrastructure, our streets, and our lighting. They go shopping, they dine. They also, the citizens of Englewood also can enjoy many recreational activities, including Pirates Cove, Broken Tea, the libraries, our parks, and of course their home environment. As a city, what we're challenged to meet are our community needs using 21st century service. And what we've heard from our citizens is that they want improved storm drainage systems. They want us to fix alleys and maintain streets. They want to ensure well-planned redevelopment. They want us to provide additional online services and reduce paper systems. They want us to provide easily accessible documents, including core requests. Upgraded parks and improved recreation is always something that we're hearing is of great need in our city. And they also want us to be a green, data-driven city. We're also considering trash hauler options. In our opinion, together with council, we're listening to the community needs. We're making worthwhile investments that the citizens deserve. And our continued and focused efforts will make the community investments the best they can be. And together we will make it happen. So I think repetition is good, and so I included in the package some information that was previously shared with council in March when we did the budget workshop, a view of our general fund, our fixed non-discretionary costs versus our variable and discretionary costs. These are the slides that were animated in your deck. So our 2019, taking a look at the year that we're currently in, our variable costs or our discretionary costs in our budget, approximately $26.4 million. Our fixed cost, or non-discretionary, which I'll describe in the next several slides, is approximately the same amount, $26.3 million, for a total budget of $52.7 million. So let me first talk about the fixed cost. These are non-discretionary costs. You can see the composition is primarily staffing. We've got the Englewood Employee Association. We have the Englewood Police Benefits Association. We have the Police and Fire Pension, Old Hire and Voluntary. We also have fixed contractual services, which include the Denver Fire contract, the telephone contract, software and hardware and maintenance contracts. In addition, we have debt service and operating transfers out, which is the capital that was invested that at the direction of council for our building this year, and some other public works projects. So our fixed costs, which are non-discretionary, that we can't change without considerable discussion, $26.2 million. Our variable costs, so those costs that we can have some flexibility with, are approximately the same amount, $26.4 million. And you can see that the large majority of that includes other exempt, part-time, and seasonal staffing. We are a service organization, so in the past two slides you can see the biggest chunk of our budget is people-related. The contractual services in our variable costs include design and engineering professional services, consulting services or outside legal professional services, capital expenses, and commodities. So with our budget, what we've been able to do, we've been able to implement systems that make us more effective and efficient, and I'd like to give you some examples of that. OpenGov is one of the systems that we've implemented recently to improve the transparency for our citizens to know what we're working on. We also implemented iCompass, which enables us to share not only with City Council, but also citizens what's on tap for discussions. It also helps streamline our effectiveness and efficiency within the office because we're able to have a workflow, an approval workflow that isn't paper-driven. I'm also going to mention the procurement system, and this was actually kind of ironic. The procurement system, now we're able to load documents into the system. So not only is it an automated workflow, but the documents are attached before anything is approved for purchase orders and invoices. What's ironic about it yesterday is that I had a lot of my team over at our table with a lot of burgundy folders, and I'm like, what are those? And they said, oh, they're all our old purchase orders that we used to have to reference when we had to pay an invoice or what have you, but now it's all automated. So we've had a lot of efficiencies. We've streamlined processes, the core requests. We've combined the Citizen Magazine and Recreation Guide into one, also creating an efficiency and better communication with our citizens. The automated systems, I was just referring to a couple, but the other one that we thought of was the timekeeping system. So we've got a better way to track our employees' times, so we're using that system. We've developed and utilized the Geographic Information System. We've built a state-of-the-art police headquarters building and through all this, truly, we believe with City Council's direction, we as a team and as a staff, we have all managed the city's financial resources responsibly. And I put together a graph that shows our compounded annual growth rate, both for revenue and expenditure, and I think this visually represents what I was just talking about. So over the past 11 years, our revenue growth, compounded annual growth rate, has been approximately 2.7%. At the same time, our expenditure compounded annual growth rate has been maintained at 1.3%. And I think a good comparison, not only to the revenue growth, also a good comparison is the CPI. The CPI for all items in the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood, Colorado areas has been 2.2%. So we have been almost as a city 1% below that CPI rate. So I wanted to provide you with an overview of how large the budgets are for 2019 for each of the areas that we're going to be hearing from today. And you can see the most significant, as I mentioned before, are the service organizations related to Parks and Rec, the police, and Public Works. And you can see the relative size of the support organizations on the upper half of the chart, just to give you relative scale. So when you're hearing the requests today from the department directors, you can reference this slide and you can see relative to the size of their budgets what the requests are going forward into 2020. Oh, and I also should mention the fire contract as well. So very service oriented, you know, we're talking 3/4 of the pie is related to the services that we provide to the citizens. This is another slice of a look at our budget. And I point this out because, you know, we've talked about the contractual services and the types of costs that are included in that. But you can see, again, that our salaries and wages and benefits are approximately close to 60% of our total general fund budget. This is important to mention for two reasons. You can see our salaries piece of that total of the $30 million is salary and wages, but 25% of that is benefits. $7.5 million is benefits. It's important to note because as we look at the city as a good place to be and to work, you know, employers retain and attract employees by offering competitive compensation and offering competitive benefits. And so we are challenged every day to attract good talent. And when we look at what salary increases are being experienced out in the workplace, we have to manage within a certain number in order to maintain a solid budget. But some of the key facts that we have to take into consideration as we're building the budget and we're determining what our salary increase budget will be for next year, we have to consider the following things. We have to consider currently that we will be in negotiation with the Englewood Employee Association in 2019 for fiscal years 2020 and 21. We also have to recognize that the Englewood Police Benefits Association negotiated salary and wage increase in 2019 and 2020 is set at 3.5%. We also are keeping in mind that the Colorado state salary wage increase for each year of 2019 and 20 is and will be 3%. But in contrast, other organizations that we're competing with in Colorado for key talent in the public and private sectors have increased in 2018 5.5%, 3-year average increase of 4.9%, and a 5-year average increase of 5.5%. So at this point, that's the premise, and we're going to have Director Gonzalez join us at the table to talk about how human resources, under the direction of Maria, has really shown tremendous process improvement and fiscal responsibility in managing the benefits that, I mentioned were such a large part of the budget.
So let's talk about the benefits universe. Okay, if we think about it as a benefits universe, the pieces that we have to consider are the employer piece, the plans, other benefits, and the employee piece. So when we talk about the employer, okay, this is what we have done in the last 2 years. We used to budget benefits by plan. So we had 4 plans with 2 different vendors, by number of employees, which fluctuate, not that much, but we need to consider how many we have, and by tier. And what I mean by tier is we need to budget if it's employee only, employee plus 1, or employee plus family. And the cost of those 3 are very, very difficult to forecast. So we had 3 variables. And this year, for the first time, we went to a defined contribution. We call it the benefits bonus, or the benefit budget for the employees. So they get a set amount of money, and they can buy whatever they want on open enrollment with that money that we provide. That reduces the number of variables to budget, but budgeting only by tier. That reduces the budgeting complexity, and of course, improve the forecast accuracy that we can have when we budget for benefits. And as you saw, I mean, we're talking about 20 to 25% of the budget on payroll. Next one. If we talk about the employee side of benefits, what we did was to put in what we call the opt-out option. Benefits, when we talk about health benefits, we have 2 big portions. One portion is the premium that we pay, and the other portion that we have is the claims that we have within the insurance. So we had in 2018 384 participants. We have 339 participants. And what we did is give the employees the choice and help them out financially to opt out of our benefits. So they can go on their spouse, they can go on their parents, they can go on Medicaid. So we're giving them it's $100, $200, $300 this year if they bring proof of insurance and they don't participate in our plan. That helps us because we still have the benefits available, but we have more options, so we increase the number of options that we have without costing us any money. And by having 43 employees opt out, we are saving $550,000 this year. And that's just on premiums. We cannot tell you how much we're saving on claims until the end of the year because obviously we don't have those numbers yet. That offset the anticipated 2020 increases. So with the money we're saving, having the same benefits and the same number of employees, we may be able to absorb the increase of health care without asking for more money in the budget. Then when we talk about the plans, and that's what we're starting to do now, we need to keep reviewing the plans. We need to review the claims and pharmacy management. By doing that, by analyzing the claims and the pharmacy, we have found areas of the plan that we are not using as a group, so we can reduce how much those cost and increase that same budget in other areas. We're working with our provider, which is currently Cigna, to come up with a pharmacy option that is different than what we have right now because we have a couple of employees that have very high claims. And I don't want to bore anybody, but the pharmacy claim management is probably the most overseen and the most expensive piece of health benefits in today's world when we have a lot of development on the medicines. We also want to do plan management. As I said, I mean, we may not be using things that we have in the plan that were designed for 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Employees are not using it any longer, so why are we paying for those plans? That will allow us to maximize the benefit choice because we're going to have an outstanding plan that people use, but it also drive effective cost control. We don't want to be paying for things that we don't use.
So as you hear the requests that the department directors are making, and that's the next part of our presentation, when we meet as a team and we talk about the line item budgets, we will be talking about other areas and creative ways that we can help offset the cost increases that obviously we are experiencing based on the CPI that you showed. So we're very cognizant as a team that we do need to look for ways to find process improvements. So like human resources, we're looking at big things that we can save money to offset the increase in costs that we undoubtedly are going to face. Okay? So with that, We will transition now into the individual department discussions with you regarding the changes and in programs and staffing that they're recommending for the 2020 budget.
Thank you. We're going to start with the city manager's office because I get to go first. Our priorities and initiatives for 2020 include an upgrade of the city's document management and records retention. This has been a key priority of the city clerk's division and something that we need to continue to invest in order to provide those 21st century services for our citizens. City Council has made it clear that we need to invest in emergency management, so that's included in the city manager's budget. We want to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of our communications department to make sure that we're listening to and responding to the requests for information from our community. And I'm proposing a neighborhood liaison pilot project. I will provide more information later via memo to you about that and would welcome that conversation. But basically, this is an effort as a pilot project to ramp up our ability as a city to respond to questions from our citizens. As council is all too aware, we get many, many questions about who do I call for X, who do I call about Y. And to have a centralized tracking system, you know, one person is not going to answer every question, but we want to make 100% sure that when a citizen calls with a question or a concern, it is addressed immediately, thoroughly, and those responses are tracked and shared with council and the community so that we're able to move forward on that. Right now, we're going to need to ramp that up to make it effective. You know, what that looks like in a year or two, I'm not too sure. But I think, as you can see there, I'm calling that neighborhood liaison a temporary position until we get the processes in place. But backing up, in order to do that records management, we'd like an additional deputy city clerk. The amount includes benefits, that important piece of our personnel costs. We're estimating the emergency manager position would be about $130,000, including benefits. And we would like to add additional technology to our communications department, including things like video editing and that sort of thing, to improve the effectiveness of the communications department and all its efforts. I'm speaking for the city attorney's office in the absence of our city attorney today. Basically, there are no significant budget changes that the city attorney's office has proposed. I know that council will be speaking further with the city attorney about priorities and initiatives, but from a budgeting perspective, there should be no significant impact.
Good morning. The Municipal Court will have priorities and initiatives that are going to implement a new case management system. I'll be coming to council further on that, hopefully in June. The funds for the case management system were approved in 2019, or for the 2019 budget, so there's no additional request for that. This new case management system is going to allow us to enhance our online operations for our court customers, be able to call in or be able to go online and hopefully pay additional tickets in addition to our parking tickets that they can pay online now. We want them to be able to potentially set up court dates without having to come in person, et cetera. Really, this would be a benefit to the community, to anyone, and help streamline services also within the court itself. We will be implementing legislative mandates that have come down. There are some that are still pending out there. We're not exactly sure what all of those are going to affect us, but there have been several this year that we will have to address. We are also wanting to be partners in the community with mental health and addiction issues and provide appropriate services, which we do now, but we want to continue to enhance those for the population that we may service through the court also. Pardon me. We want to foster communication with the public and other departments, and again, this is in a lot of those regards to let people know what we are doing to facilitate those that are in need in the community. We will have minimal requests, and right now I can't actually tell you exactly what those are going to be for our program level changes in 2020. We will experience a minimal increase for our security services and our training costs. Again, the legislative mandates are going to change how we have to do business in order to enforce our court orders. We can see potentially that we are going to have additional need for court-appointed counsel services. That is just, more people are qualifying for court-appointed counsel that we must provide for them, and we're having more come through the system that meet those criteria.
So the 2020 priorities for HR is implementing a new HR information and payroll system. The system that we have is not conducive to provide us the information and the control over the headcount and the payroll that we need. So we have an RFP out, and we're looking to replace it without having to ask for any more money in the budget. We don't know the prices until we finish with the RFP, so we will have more details and more material to provide to you once we get the RFPs back. We're asking for one HR generalist position and to cover the city needs. Basically, what we're doing right now is we have 3 business partners, and those business partners are out and about in the city. We need them to be where the employees are. So we currently have the SWRP, the plant person is there 2 days, and they have requested an additional day. So they want the HR business partner there 3 days. We want to have one person at least 1 full day or 1.5 days in the police. We want people going to the Allen plant. We want people going to the service center. So for us to be able to cover the office at the civic center, we need to add one generalist to be inside all the time so the business partners can be out helping the people where they work.
Thank you. So for finance, our priorities for 2020, we will help City Council and the team identify funding for prioritized capital projects. We will be supporting possible city center redevelopment efforts. We plan to conduct employee training on the procurement policy ordinance that was passed, and we will continue to implement the business licensure tax code change if approved. That actually will be forthcoming to council in June. So I see these as our biggest initiatives. Obviously, there are a lot of other things that we do as a support organization to help, but these are the key focus areas for us for 2020. With that, there is one request that I would like to make regarding an administrative support person for finance, HR, and IT. I see the role of this individual to help with procurement and invoice payment for those 3 organizations, and also help us prepare the iCompass documents that we do in the City Council communications, council request responses, things of that nature. So this is a function right now that I primarily handle for finance, and I know within the HR and IT area that the directors and some staff do. But it certainly is something that we could use additional help, especially as we move forward into some larger strategic efforts that we want to have as a city, that we receive some administrative support for some of the things that are more routine to help us. Okay. I'll ask Director Brocklander to come up for information technology.
Good morning. All right. Okay. The 2020 priorities and initiatives for IT include continuing upgrading and replacing existing infrastructure, automating business systems. We have several systems that we're working on currently that are all in different stages. Currently we have courts that Tammy just talked about. That one just finished up and will be coming back to council. We have permitting that is out for RFP. The HR payroll is out for RFP. Utility billing will be going out for RFP before the end of the year. So quite a bit happening with automation. And then lastly is the public safety enhancements, which is an RMS that's currently going in. And then we have a couple capital projects behind that I'll go into in more detail. The position that we're asking for is a part-time audiovisual technician. Currently, we utilize IT staff, which takes away from supporting computers. And it's also an overtime position. We pay Sam primarily overtime to support each of the council meetings. So we're asking for a part-time person skilled in audiovisual. This is a little bit different skill than IT. We do it well, but there is skills out there that can do it better than we can. Some of our capital requests for 2020 is the workstation refresh. This is an annual program where we replace desktops and worktops, or laptops. IT infrastructure improvements. So this is all of our network side, updating the outdated equipment that we currently have. Security cameras, updating and adding to the additional security cameras that we have. Rugged computers, this is a new project that we'd like to introduce over at PD. This is issuing rugged laptops to each of the officers at PD rather than putting individual computers in the cars and then having computers in the PD building. So this makes them more mobile. They don't have to wait for computers, and they don't have to write computers in their cars or in the patrol area. They have a computer, they take it with them to the car, to the hospital, to the school, to the PD building. They take it with them, it's issued to them. So they're mobile all the time. And the fiber network for 2019, we're planning on putting fiber from the PD building to Civic Center. And for next year, we'd like to put fiber from the rec center over to Civic Center. So eventually linking all of the buildings that we have in the city over to Civic Center across our own fiber. Audiovisual at Hampton Hall. This is replacing some of the lighting and a soundboard, I believe. Council chambers, the audiovisual equipment in there currently is greater than 10 years old. We're not sure exactly when it was put in, but it is end of life. So we'd like to upgrade all of the equipment in council chambers. And then as Maria talked about, the HR payroll system and the mobile data terminals, the MDTs for code enforcement, this is dependent on the rugged computers. If we receive the rugged computer capital request, then we do not need this. If we do not receive the rugged computer request, then we will need to add mobile data terminals into code enforcement so they are more mobile in the field.
Okay, thank you. As Director Power comes up, I will mention that we did present the original capital list to you on April 22nd. There have been some updates, but you have the information that's being shared with you in the presentation is also on the detailed capital list. So I just wanted to reference that document.
Good morning, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. The priorities for community development for 2020 include the following. We've been talking recently in the last several months about the generational opportunity that we have to reposition this property, City Center. And so that's going to continue. Generational opportunities tend to take a while to fulfill. So this is obviously going to be a multi-year effort on behalf of the city. I can tell you that a buyer for the former Weingarten property was chosen last week. And so that's underway in terms of their due diligence process has begun. We've been in touch with that buyer. Our RFP for the city-controlled properties is due mid part of next week. So we'll also be coming back to you about that and have a conversation about those two items in terms of your next steps and direction to us. But as I said, that's going to be well into next year. And possibly even beyond if this is kind of a phased approach to the redevelopment of this property. It's going to be an ongoing situation for the city, and it's, as I said, it's a generational opportunity, and it's going to take us continued focus and effort, and that's why it's on our priorities list for next year. Secondly, the city closed out its formal housing rehabilitation program some time ago, and the remaining funds that were associated with that effort were deposited into what is known as Fund 46. And what we are asking for your consideration, and we will be coming back to you over the summer with this more fleshed out, because we're very at the beginning of the discussions internally about how something like this could work. But you're familiar with our Energy Efficiency Englewood E3 program that we use federal funds to incorporate changes in energy improvements for homes owned by income qualified people in Englewood. This effort would be a step beyond that. It would focus on emergency home repairs for people who come under unfortunate but very necessary immediate needs. And as I said, we'll be coming back to you with some more information fleshed out about that. But we think there may be time to utilize some of those funds going forward in terms of this second home repair program that we would implement. Our economic development efforts are really about framing our story, and more importantly, framing the story of the people that we help in the community, the businesses who are expanding here, the businesses who are locating here, and we're getting more adept at social media. We want to continue that into next year, and we really want to have the business-to-business stories told. And so you'll see a reflection of an increased request for us to be able to do that. Margaret mentioned some of the online services that IT is starting to frame in terms of the development work plan for next year. We too are part of that in partnership with the IT group. They've issued a RFP that is out on the street now to implement online services that would enable our customers on both the building and planning side to remotely access both application, permit, and payment systems. And perhaps our most ambitious program and priority and initiative that we'd like you to consider for next year, and actually beyond, is looking at Title 16, the Zoning and Development Code. And I'll get into a little bit more about that in a minute when I talk about the funding. So, home repair program in terms of our costs, we're suggesting that be at $100,000. This would be loan-based. We're still kicking around the idea internally about how much each individual homeowner could qualify for. But again, this would not be a general fund expense. It would come from that separate fund that was the housing fund. City Center, as I mentioned, is going to be ongoing, so we anticipate additional design, legal, other types of costs. And one of the things that is very key that's still in front of us as a community and for you as the council is to hear from the community about the community's priorities for City Center. And now that we have the shaping of who may be involved in the development on the private side, we're going to be very quickly moving into going to the community with those potential partners and asking the community's relative priorities and programs that should happen here at City Center. So that, as I said, will likely extend well into next year. It's not a priority because we kind of consider it a core service, but it's there. Our partnership with RTD on the Englewood Trolley. You see an increase there in terms of a budget request. I should say the way that the RTD contract works between us and RTD is the city pays for the entirety of the trolley service, and then the city is reimbursed by RTD. And so that $65,000 number will be reimbursed at approximately 80%. So the increase for next year is about $13,000, which is fully reflective of the increased hours that we've added to the trolley in the evening, Monday through Friday. Parenthetically, I should say that we are going to be issuing an RFP for the trolley services in mid-June, so you'll be seeing a lot more information around the future of the trolley services later this year. Back to Title 16, again, probably another generational opportunity to look at how we do land use control and regulation in the community. The last time it was updated was 2004, which isn't too surprising for communities, but as we're all very much aware, in the last 5 years, a lot of change has happened in this community, and the pace of change has picked up remarkably. Remarkably, it's really nobody has ever seen this pace of change before. And one of the things I think that is particularly mindful that you all are very much aware of, as are we, is the pace of change in the neighborhoods and the types and different types of residential development, particularly, that we're seeing. And so it's possibly now a good time with the community to take a look at how we do land use regulation in the community. That being said, throughout the remainder of this year, you will be seeing some interim steps that we're working on, such as short-term rentals, amending the PUD process. So we're still continuing to work on some of these interim items, but we think it might be timely, starting next year, to start to look at the long-term land use regulation components of our city code. And the way that we would break that down is that in 2020, we're requesting professional services of approximately $50,000 to be able to help us get somebody here who can facilitate a community input process about what types of scale and pace of change that we want to see in terms of how we do the land use regulations. So that would be the focus in 2020. And then in 2021, we would undertake what is essentially, probably most recently in your experience, a comprehensive plan effort in terms of the time and the magnitude and frankly the cost of doing a major stem to stern update of our Title 16. That part of our code is 11 chapters long. It has 102 sections, and so that would not be a 2 or 3 month process. That would be a considerable investment of both time and funds and brain power on your part, on the Planning and Zoning Commission's part, and of course on staff. And then finally, I alluded to before, we want to continue to ramp up our economic development marketing efforts, and we especially want to make sure that the businesses that we work with are able to tell their story to other businesses, because we think that's most leverageable in the community. Finally, in terms of our capital requests, for 2020, in terms of the 5-year plan, community development did not have a project that was on the list for 2020, so you see the 0 there, but I did want to make a note that in the long term, we've decided in conversations internally that the vast majority of community development's capital requests in the past have largely been construction oriented in terms of the public realm, sidewalks, crossings, the bridges that you're very much familiar with. Those seem to us to be more in the public works realm in terms of the location where those things should actually be listed for the community and for you in terms of their funding priorities. So that you may not see as many capital requests for community development in the future, but we will continue to be involved at the very beginning of things in terms of our long-term planning efforts in the community that identify community-wide capital investments. The community development will still be helping steer the ship on that. So that concludes my remarks, and I appreciate your time this morning.
That's okay. Okay. At this time, we'll ask Director Lee to come up and talk about Parks, Recreation, and Library.
Good morning, Council. The Parks, Recreation, and Library 2020 priorities and initiatives include expanding the availability of field space for youth sports. This has been a priority because of the number of youths participating in athletics, so we're looking at researching and finding new areas to open up for field usage. We also want to improve engagement with the youth ages 8 to 14. This has been a big priority for the Parks and Recreation Commission. There's a feeling that these kids are not engaged right now, and we need to find better ways of reaching out to them to engage them in parks and recreation. We also have continued planning and design for capital improvements in the parks, at Pirates Cove, and at the recreation centers. We're also focusing on marketing strategies to increase participation and engage the community, and this involves working with the new communications manager to develop new strategies to reach out to the community. Operational requests, we're looking for a part-time facility supervisor at the Englewood Rec Center. This is to cover weekends and evenings when there isn't a supervisor currently on duty, and this is, again, a part-time position with no benefits. We also have a huge impact on the mandated minimum wage increases for seasonals and temporaries. Currently it's at $11.10. Next year it goes up to $12 per hour. And in order to stay competitive with the other entities around us, we have to offer that plus a little bit more. And down below there, you can see the impact to the different divisions. Pirates Cove making up the lion's share of that because of all the lifeguards and attendants and concessions people that we employ out there on an annual basis. Other requests which will go into the operational budget for parks is going to be the Broadway holiday lighting and the Broadway flower pots. These used to be funded out of the former bid operational capital, and that money has been expired. The bid no longer exists down there on Broadway, and so these items are still important to the city. The holiday lighting, we obviously decorate the trees. We have 38 street trees down on Broadway from Hamden to Floyd Avenue, and they get decorated every year around the holidays. The Broadway flower pots is another major beautification project that's down there, the big concrete or cement flower pots that are on the street corners and along the sidewalks. There's 27 of those pots between Hamden and Yale. So those are big or important priorities as well for us. Capital requests. We had come to council in a study session prior and talked about concreting over the Santa Fe and Hamden landscaped medians to save some capital dollars there. So that's a big project. And then also we'll be looking at park planning and design for all the different parks. And this is really important to have this money so that we can be shovel ready in the future with these projects and improvements to the parks. And then also it's really important to coordinate this so that the storm drainage portion of this gets included into the parks with any improvements. The next 6 below that are perennial capital requests that come out of Public Improvement Fund, the Capital Projects Fund, Conservation Trust Fund, and Open Space. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. At this time, we'll ask Police Chief Collins to join us at the table.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay. So for 2020, I've enumerated some, I've highlighted 4 programs that that are high on my list, and the first one is to complete the implementation of the shared records management system. That will go live in November, but obviously the trick to that system will be how it operates throughout the rest of the year. And we went through the same process essentially with CAD, and that's working fluidly right now. So I expect that to be a success as well. High on our list, if not the highest thing on my list, is homelessness and the crisis intervention team and the co-responder program. As you well remember, several years ago we talked about getting mental health folks out into the field with us, and we were fortunate enough to develop a partnership with the crisis intervention team, and it has exceeded my expectations for success, and I'll get into that again a little bit later on. My next one is more of an internal program that is near and dear to me, and that's the development of our peer support program. As you may know, suicide in law enforcement throughout the country is on the rise, and we have been affected by that as well. And we tried over the last couple of years to kick this into gear, but it just wouldn't take hold. So following a recent loss of one of our employees, I brought in the Aurora Police Department's peer support group. And following that, every employee in the organization had an opportunity to listen and learn from them. Husbands, wives, significant others all came together and put this peer support group into effect. There's going to be a lot of training for our cadre of peer support folks, but I think we finally have a program that will work for us internally to help offset employees that are going through some mental health crises. And finally, crime analysis, hotspots, zone policing, and smart force. I believe most of this you're familiar with, and they have been successful. We recently purchased a program called Smart Force, and that falls right into play with our crime analysis. And again, it gives officers, instant information and as to what is going on the street, and it just enhances what our gal in crime analysis does, rather than getting information that's 24, 48 hours in arrears. We get it right away. The requests that we have, I won't read this list to you, but I will tell you that I guess it's the top part that's really causing me to put this on there. The district attorney, when we had felony case filings, they will always ask for whether you want audio, or they want audio and digital evidence. That would be police dispatch tapes and whatnot. That has increased enormously. That trickled down to where they now want everything for misdemeanor cases. That has yet trickled down to when an officer makes a traffic stop, they want those digital recordings of what the officer says on the air. One Gal in Records took on the role of trying to pull all this data, and now it's become a full-time job, and that is taken away from her role as a records specialist. And so there have been threats, not just to us, but to other agencies, that if we do not get that data to them on time, the DA's office will have to dismiss cases, and that's the last thing I want. But that has not happened to us yet, so we still have our heads above water with that. And then on the bottom, you'll see the crisis intervention team co-responder position. That salary or that number is high, very high. My guess, if you wanted to, because those are not employees, and that has salary and benefits embedded in it. My guess is 80,000, and the benefits and stuff would be paid by their employer. And I'll talk about it now. When we brought in our one co-responder, the program became so successful that they actually gave us additional help. They gave us the help from the crisis intervention team, mobile crisis units, and all for $27,000 is what my line item account is for that. And it has a two-pronged effect. We wanted help with the homeless community and trying to get them back into mainstream society. They also respond with officers to families in crisis, and that has been just a fabulous addition to what the program was. We have families in crisis that get to see somebody immediately, and you can't put a price tag on that. So that's high on my list. And then I just wanted to bring your attention. What my hope is next year is to include the following operating equipment, which is they all have a lifespan, and so whether they're 3 years or 5 years, these items will expire. And I think right now the thought process is to build this into your budget each year, as you know they will come due the following year. And so that's what we plan to do. So these tasers, gas masks, self-contained breathing apparatus are all life and health and safety issues. But that's what I intend to put into the budget next year. But we do want to bring that to your attention as well. And I think that's it.
It is. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll ask Director Deandra to join us and discuss Public Works.
Good morning. So a few priorities for Public Works. First, we intend to continue with our alley maintenance program. It's been going very well. If you're tracking on our online map, we have completed roughly 80% of Area 1, which is the northeast quadrant roughly of the city. We're about 30% through Area 3, which is the northwest quadrant. And then eventually we'll move down into areas 2 and 4 in the southern portion of the city. So that really has been a very useful tool in communicating with the public and allowing them to know kind of what our progress is and how quickly they can expect service in their area. But beyond the short term, so our initial idea is to do that initial grading, which is what we're going through now. But then we want to continue to put this summer and then next year more emphasis on fine grading so that the alleys drain better. So that means going in, spending more time to make sure that they're graded out. And then we're also planning to apply a material called DuraBlend, which I've used in the past. It's a material that allows for those surface materials, the very kind of top layer of the gravel and asphalt millings to actually bind together. It's called DuraBlend. And so that acts to kind of almost sheet off the water to some extent, but binds those particles together, especially those very fine materials in the surface, and then acts as a dust suppressant as well. So that's our plan for this summer as well as into next year. And we anticipate that because of this extra work, that the alley conditions will be much better next spring, and we'll continue to work on that over the next year. We're also planning to establish levels of service in each division. And if you're not familiar with that term, what that means is how many times will we do X? So this was a comment that actually came up in the alley maintenance discussion is, oh, we used to see them all the time. And that could have been true. The problem is we don't have established levels of service right now. How often do we sweep citywide from curb to curb? We do sweep, but do we get down into the curb lines and actually have people move their cars? So it's doing some of those things. Similarly, for our internal customers, setting levels of service, what can people expect from our custodial staff? How many times per day do we, or per week, do we vacuum or clean the mirrors or mop the floors, that sort of thing? And starting to do that, then we can get a better handle on the number of staff we have, as well as then what type of service people can expect in return. Creating asset management plans. So we had talked earlier in the year about this. You know, my goal is to complete the asset management plan for pavement yet this year. And so for next year, we'd focus on more of the traffic side of things, doing that for signals, signs, and street lighting. So again, asset management plans involve an inventory, finding out first what do you have, how many, where are they at, and then what condition are they in. And then coming up with a plan for how we go about replacing those on a systematic and consistent basis. We will continue our street maintenance program. So this year we're in area 1. Next year we'll be in areas 2 and 3. We follow the sidewalk maintenance, follows that corrective area of street maintenance. So we'll be in area 2 next year and have the funding identified for that. And then finally, we're going to go through and look at the SURF fund, which is the Capital Equipment Replacement Fund. This is what we use to, it's an internal transfers between departments to the SURF fund to replace vehicles primarily. There is some equipment in there as well. But we want to look at that and make sure that not only is that formula transparent to departments, but is it accurate? Is it capturing everything in terms of maintenance, the labor that we put into maintaining those vehicles? And then are we adequately budgeting so that we can replace those vehicles on a reasonable cycle? So we are requesting 3 additional positions. One for an additional custodial position for the police headquarters building. We did increase the square footage at police headquarters by roughly 50%. And so we want to keep that building in good condition. And so by assigning another individual over there, we think we can do that effectively. We would also include some day porter services so that paper towels are refilled during the day, and it is a 24/7 operation. So we want to make sure we're serving them in a reasonable manner. Secondly, we've talked about this before, is an asset management position. They would learn intimately that asset management software program, which we have not purchased yet, but we do have funding for. identified in previous years, and then oversee basically the analysis of that program to assist our project managers and our division managers as to how to go about, again, managing those assets. And finally, an additional project manager position to handle the increased workload. And you'll see on the next slide the number of capital projects that we have identified for 2020. And I would say, Maria will get into this in a little bit, but those numbers of projects and the dollar totals just continue to increase. So we do need another project manager position to handle all of those. We do also manage a number of parks projects. So Dave just presented his list, and we want to get more towards this centralized kind of project management concept so that we're delivering projects on time, on budget, and with a high level of quality. And so the only operational request, we are asking for additional funds to provide for those alley maintenance materials. Primarily that would be that DuraBlend material, as well as additional asphalt millings or other materials to be brought in to level off those alleys. We feel we can handle the staff resources internally. There's no request there for additional staff resources to do that task. And then finally, the capital requests. These are actually spread over 2 slides. So you can see here we've got our annual programs for street maintenance. We have included an initial year for alley paving. We would still have to go through and figure out how we prioritize which alleys to pave and in what materials. I have been doing some research on paving alleys with a permeable type of surface so that we would have the materials not run off of a hard surface but actually infiltrate into the ground. So I'm doing research on that right now, and we'll bring that back. We have several significant projects that have been approved by Dr. Cog that actually went through is going through next Wednesday. The US 285 congestion mitigation study that extends from the 2 signals just west of Santa Fe into Sheridan, all the way to I-25. And so we've partnered with the cities of Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village to fund that, along with CDOT and Dr. Cog through federal transportation funds. Similarly, the Broadway US 285 interchange, in this initial year, we're planning to do design and environmental assessment in anticipation of full reconstruction starting probably in 2021, and would last at least a good 1.5 to 2 years for that. We did receive $7.8 million in federal transportation dollars, as well as $800,000 from CDOT for that. The Oxford pedestrian bridge, similarly in 2020, we would take on design and environmental assessment at a cost of $400,000, and the remaining costs of $1.6 million are federal transportation dollars through Dr. Cog, and we'd construct in 2021. Then we have our sidewalk projects, either expansion or repair of those existing programs, upgrading our traffic signals. You want to go to the next slide? And just a variety of things here, kind of the last 2/3 of that list are projects related to building maintenance and repairs. So of course that falls under Public Works as well. We have some planned building maintenance here at the Civic Center, basically upgrading the elevator, replacing some carpet both in the library and up on the 3rd floor, redoing the gym floor at Malley Center, and then some remodeling and parking lot resurfacing or paving out at the service center. And then at the bottom there you see our planned expenditures for capital equipment replacement are about $1.6 million. So overall, a very aggressive program at over $14 million in a given year.
Thank you. At this time, if Director Brennan could join us.
Thank you. Good morning. Utilities is broken down into 3 funds. The first one being water. Our 2020 priorities, I broke them down by division. Source and supply is water quality. With the quality of water in the South Platte degrading, we're blending other sources, primarily City Ditch and Bear Creek water, to help improve the quality of the raw water we take into the plant. Purification division is also a focus of water quality. We're hearing that from our customers. Excuse me. In purification, we're dealing with plant optimization, and it's reducing our chemical use and also reducing our power consumption. Those are our two big cost drivers. Distribution system, the infrastructure. These next 2 years, we're focusing on valve replacement and elimination of dead-end mains. And the elimination of dead-end mains will also help with the water quality. Administration is efficiencies. We're implementing the new billing system, as you heard earlier, and we're also replacing meters at an accelerated pace. Next slide. All right. Operational request is a development master plan. A master plan will analyze and make recommendations for system improvements. Rate and fee study. The rate and fee study will ensure that we're, excuse me. Where did I put it? Recovering sufficient revenue to cover our cost. And the last one is a update emergency response preparedness plan. That is an upcoming regulatory requirement. Okay, next slide. Our big capital request, Meadow Creek Reservoir. It's a reservoir we own up outside of Fraser. Other than routine maintenance, we have a 10-mile conduit that we're currently inspecting and performing repairs on. The Clearwell roof repair, this section of the Clearwell was put in service in the early 80s, and the concrete now is ready to be protected to extend its life. Another big program we have is our meter and ERT replacement. We currently replace approximately 700 meters a year, and that is the source of our revenue, so accurately recording usage is critical. And the big one is routine maintenance. In the distribution system, it's infrastructure upgrades and maintenance. And the big one is at the water plant. It's about $1 million at the water plant, and that's for valves, motors, pumps, filters, and all other accessories there. Next fund is the sewer fund, 2020 priorities, collection system. We're going to be continuing to clean the entire system every year and perform repairs that are identified. We currently do about 6 to 12 repairs a year. Also, I failed to mention, we currently have 5 data collectors out in the system. So as the crews are out, they're collecting data, which will support the master planning efforts, as well as the development of our GIS system. Also, we are currently in discussions with Southgate Sanitation District. They purchased brand new closed circuit TV technology that allows you to get through the system very efficiently, and it's automated in the processing and rating of the data collected, and that will also help support the master plan. Sanitary sewer, here's our operational quest, as I spoke to earlier. In addition, the rate and fee study, we also assess the services we provide to the connectors districts to make sure we're recovering our costs that we provide, the services we provide to them. Capital request, ongoing system repair, as I had mentioned earlier, our new billing software, and then, of course, the big driver is the South Platte Water Renewal Partners capital request. Storm drainage, big item here is we've got 2 employees dedicated to cleaning the system, and at the same time with those data collectors, they are mapping it, which will also help with the master plan development. And also we will be, in conjunction with Public Works, analyzing the study recommendations and in developing long-term capital plans for rehab of the storm drainage system. Request, as I said, is rehabilitation and replacement of the storm drainage system, cost to be determined pending the outcome of the caliber study.
Okay, thank you, Tom. As you can see, Director Deandra and Director Van Rye are here sitting at the table, and we're going to take a moment to talk about 2020 capital request for water, sanitary, sewer, and stormwater.
Yeah, so first of all, with storm drainage, as Tom mentioned, we are still working on the caliber study. They anticipate delivering that draft results to us, which is the deliverable is a list of prioritized projects along with estimated costs for implementing those by the end of this month. So we will, a study session has already been scheduled for June 10th to discuss that with City Council. But at this time, we're estimating, just a very rough estimate, that those improvements are in that $80 to $100 million range. So that's the flood-prone areas. That's what Caliber is working on. The non-flood-prone areas, this would be areas where there already is storm sewer or drainage ponds. That still has yet to be analyzed and developed. There has been no systematic analysis of the condition of those pipes, or has there been a lot of analysis of their sizes done at this time. And subsequently then, we are not sure what the rates and fees are that translate back into maintaining that entire system. So there's really 2 parts to that. The flood-prone areas, as Caliber is studying currently, and the non-flood-prone areas. And what we're going to talk about, as well as with the water and sanitary sewer system, is to do a full rate analysis in 2019 in anticipation so that our rates reflect, or excuse me, to do a master plan to know what the condition are of those existing assets, and then do a full rate and fee analysis to translate back the fees into what it would take to maintain the existing system as well as build the new improvements that Caliber has identified. So that's the plan for the remainder of 2019. I'll let Peter talk a little bit now about water and sanitary sewer as well as the schedule for all 3 of those funds.
Sure. Thank you, Maria. It's very similar in the sense that there has not been a comprehensive assessment of the water system or the sanitary sewer system for several years, and so to develop the master plan is basically gives you a roadmap for what needs to be done over the next several years. And so if you look at the schedule of how this how these lay out and correlate with each other, beginning in 2019, in the next couple months, we would want to get some consultant on board to actually develop a master plan. So the master plan is the foundation for off of which you build the rates and fees. And so you have to understand what's required in order to actually build a rate and fee model and then subsequently a financial plan. So from July through the end of the year would be the time to actually develop at least enough of a capital plan and operations plan for water, sewer, and storm to be able to then move into a rate and fee analysis where you're then building on that information with the financial plan. So then you begin the rate and fee analysis sometime around January of next year. By May, there should be enough information to be able to bring forward recommendations for rates and fees, and then the further refinement and development of that financial plan in through the summer to the point where you, by October of 2020, there's a comprehensive rate and fee and financial plan for the 3 utilities themselves, to include the South Platte Water Renewal Partners, and then those fees would ultimately go into effect in 2021. Part of the reason why you take this step process through it is because rates and fees need to be defendable. So you need the background information, you need the supporting documentation to be able to show that there is a rationale for why the fees are being rates and fees are being developed the way they are. So generally, we have to get started right now with the master planning piece of this to be able to hit that schedule, so that by October of 2020, we're recommending to council new rates and fees for water and sewer. And then that's into South Platte Water Renewal Partners. And so for South Platte Water Renewal Partners, can we go to the next slide? Sure. So our priorities are financial plan. We actually just did our kickoff meeting for our cost of service analysis. So that the reason why we're doing a cost of service analysis is because we don't set rates and fees at South Platte Water Renewal Partners. We are a cost driver that it feeds into the sewer enterprise funds for both cities, the city of Englewood and the city of Littleton. And so, but we happen to be the largest cost driver of both those funds. So our work right now is building off the master plan, which was just completed for our facility. So we have a master plan that identifies projects out into 2042, essentially 20 years. And that takes us through the time frame of meeting Regulation 31, which we've talked about, which is where the Department of Public Health and the Environment drive down the phosphorus and nitrogen limits that we need to meet. In the meantime, by 2023, we have Reg 85 requirements. And so our immediate 5-year term is focused on, a lot of the capital is focused on meeting those requirements. We also have asset replacement. We have ongoing infrastructure repairs. Safety and security is a new area that we're focusing some time and effort on. We don't have complete coverage as it relates to cameras. Our fire alarm system is inadequate, to say the least. And so there's a number of those kinds of projects that we're going to begin in 2019 and we'll move over into 2020 as well. And then plant resiliency. And so what that is I've organized an internal team to really look at how resilient are we if there's some kind of a catastrophe that hits. So if someone flushes something down the sewer and it messes up our biological process, how do we respond to that? What kind of time do we have to respond to that? What kind of provisions do we have in order to be able to meet a certain level of treatment in an interim while we're trying to bring the plant up back online? So these are more of the catastrophic type of failures, but things that we want to consider and at least have an understanding of how we would respond to those. So that's a priority that internally we're going to look at this year, and then by 2020 we'll likely have some recommendations on what we can do to minimize those risks and address as much as we can. Next slide, please. So rate and fee change right now, like I said, we're underway with the cost of service analysis. We did our kickoff meeting earlier this week, and so that will give us a 10-year financial plan, of which within that financial plan we will be able to make a recommendation as it relates to rates and fees relative to the treatment component of the overall sewer rates and fees. And so there's a treatment component and there's a collection system component, and so this will provide that treatment component. And so we anticipate having results on that by the end of the year, which dovetails nicely with when the sewer system rate and fee study begins in January of next year. So this is a summary of our capital projects. It looks like a lot, and it is, but you got to remember, of that $13.7 million, Englewood's proportionate share of that is generally around 10%, so 1.3 million, because the number is split in half between Littleton and Englewood, and then a number of those of those costs are translated out to the connector district. So it's a really big number, but it's spread across 300,000 people as opposed to 35,000 people. You can see the improvements generally fall into the categories I talked about, which are asset replacement, asset upgrade. Our electrical improvements project, we have some old switch gears, so these are the main points where electricity comes into the plant, and those were built in the 70s. And so we had a breaker fail earlier this year. Fortunately, we had a shelf spare, but we're at a point in time where we need to replace some of these things. Several of the other items on there are just more infrastructure within the process system. Wastewater treatment is pretty rough on equipment, and so there's just ongoing replacement that we need to make. And then we have some the chemical phosphorus treatment process, which is about halfway down. That is addressing the Reg 85 improvements that are required to be in place by 2022. And I think that's it for capital.
Actually, Mayor, if I may, this concludes our Department 2020 budget overviews. So if you'd like, we could take a break now. Yes. So there you go. No. So yeah. So it's up to you. 9:35.
Yeah, at some point.
Something in one of their programs like 5 years back called Land Use Leadership Academy. And have you heard of that one? No. Same kind of thing. Yeah, so it's the same kind of thing. I think they were working with it. They must have been partners with a different group, but it's that same kind of thing. It's like, how do we envision incorporating water conservation?
take this and stuff. That's good. Oh, oh, yeah, do you want to press it in the middle, or you want me to continue sitting in the middle? Okay, good. I feel kind of, it's funny sitting here, I feel kind of silly, like, oh yeah, huh. I don't exactly feel that way. Okay. What's important to me too is that the coverage, revenue coverage, you can't. I mean, I appreciate that it doesn't go to a vote. That will help. But it still doesn't mean that we can go today because we don't have any information we need to.
And I won't put it off to everybody else, but I think there's some I've been very fortunate.
Yeah.
Do you want to see that or you want me to see it?
I think in here it's on this one. Oh, the timing? So,
got to communicate.
for revenue coverage. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's why the timing can't be instantaneous. Like,
Well,
it can't
I
be
doubt you're boring, so.
I told Peter, that makes sense, but if we don't have the whole picture of what it's going to cost the public, it's kind of a blind, not that they have a choice on fees and rates. Okay, we can do this. They're not ready. Yeah, we kept that in. This way.
We ready to get back? Trying to get our energy back here. Thank you for the very articulate and quick process of going through this so far. So next segment, and then we'll have time for lots of interaction, right?
Okay, so we are on to the proposed 2020 capital discussion. The information that was shared with you throughout the department presentations is represented here from a percentage basis of the total capital requests. And you can see that the largest requests are in the Public Improvement Fund and the Capital Projects Fund, Fund 30 and Fund 31. So I want to spend some time kind of going back to previous discussions we've had regarding capital and some of the funding that's available. If you'll recall, we had a conversation in March regarding the revenue and expenditure forecast and underlying assumptions. We also talked on April 22nd regarding some of the challenges. And even last week, we talked a little bit during our financial review of March, some of the challenges that we might face in securing funding for some of the capital. But all of the basic capital requests that, again, are included in your summary for Fund 30 and Fund 31 that were just discussed by each of the department directors total approximately $15.8 million, which is represented on the slide in the spreadsheet over to the right. But I want to talk a little bit about the funding that might be available for use at your direction for these projects. We currently, and we talked about this on April 22nd, we have a fund balance currently in the capital fund for 30 and 31, and we are assuming that a portion of that will be left over at the end of the year. Currently, that balance is around $3 million. So from a conservative perspective, we're saying that net of designated funds for projects completion, and perhaps if there's any emergency funding that's needed or what have you, the contingency, we might have available at the end of the year $1.5 million in those funds. We talked last week, and actually when we talked about the revenues that were available and what the revenues support these funds, the vehicle use tax, the building use tax, and the Arapahoe County Road and Bridge tax, we estimate that revenue currently to be $4 million. But if you'll recall last week during our discussion and study session regarding the March financials, we're trending a little bit below that. So that is the number that could be impacted. Right now, it looks to be about $900,000 below that $4 million level. So just keep that in mind as we're talking. And we won't really know. We have to dig into it a little bit to see if we will trend upward. But again, the vehicle use tax, for example, as I mentioned, those are one-time purchases in a 5-year period. So we might not get those revenues this year that we expect. So we need to continue to monitor that. We've talked about the fund balance that is available above the reserve policy and Tabor reserve requirements. We're currently estimating that to be approximately $6.6 million. In the presentation that I showed you last week, it's approximately $7.3 million, but because I had talked about $6.6 million at the beginning of the year, there isn't that big of a difference, and I don't know that we would recommend to council that perhaps use all of those funds above the reserve. So we'll keep that at 6.6 for now. But I will tell you that the biggest portion of that is approximately $5 million, and that's the long-term asset reserve. And so if you should choose to use those funds towards the projects you've just heard about, that would exhaust that fund. The general fund transfer of 2019 anticipated savings. This was a number that we discussed with you when we talked about the revenues. That was in March, I believe. We believe that our revenues are tracking higher in 2019 than we budgeted. And so with the total of all of those items, we approximate that we would have a source of funds of approximately $14.1 million. That we could use, or City Council could direct us to use, towards the basic capital requests of $15.8 million. That still does leave us with a funding shortfall for the projects that you've heard about so far of approximately $1.7 million. I'm going to ask Dorothy to talk about this slide.
All right, this is just kind of a recap of our capital. We've put the enterprise fund suggestions on top. It's important to know that these, I will just reiterate, are supported by fees, which is why we're putting such an emphasis, as you just heard, on master planning and a fee and rate development study to make sure that we would have the requisite fees necessary to support bonding in those enterprise funds for our community. These are all very important projects. We've heard from all of you, but we need to work forward in a systematic manner to make sure that we have the studies in place before we could even approach a bonding agency. The additional capital request, Parks and Recreation, near and dear to my heart, I must admit. I think $30 million would support 3 or 4 major park improvements. and be able to support some recreation facility improvements, including Pirates Cove. You've heard from Director DeAndrea that she would like to consider moving forward with alley paving with perhaps some creative permeable surfacing. If we were to do the entire city, it would be the 320 blocks. You had seen in her what we're calling the basic capital requests, 2.6 million, which I believe is 10 blocks. So in order to speed up that project, bonding would be necessary. The street reconstruction for the whole city, about 16 million. I would emphasize again that parks and rec improvements and street reconstruction logically would go hand in hand with any storm drainage improvements. You don't want to dig up a street without the money to repair the street and put it in pristine condition, and you don't want to do major reconstruction in our parks without taking into account long-range planning for storm drainage. We're not going to turn all of our parks into detention ponds. I personally will not let that happen, but there are lots of creative ways that we can mitigate the storm damage that might happen, and that should be a very essential part of what we're doing with our parks planning. Staff is still recommending, for all these reasons, a 2020 bond for these more comprehensive community improvements. That would include asking for rate and fee increases to support bonding in the storm drainage system or the sewer system, if so determined that there is a need by our studies. Why? We're anxious to move forward, trust me, but getting a true community input, what does the majority of our citizenry understand at this point about our storm drainage system and the needs that we have? Do they know, or have they given us lots of information on their top priorities for street maintenance or for lighting, alley input? We want to be able to make informed decisions with the consent and input of the community. A prioritized project list with citizen support is the only way to move forward. And it's important to develop and communicate clear, coordinated, and comprehensive project plans. If we go before the city and say, give us $30 million for parks, I want to be able to tell them exactly which parks, what those projects look like, and when we're going to do them. I think that's information that they deserve, for instance. It's important to know that we have limited staff capacity in some of these areas. We have wonderful finance people, wonderful legal help, but we will need to engage professional resources. That takes a little time to guarantee accurate ballot language, successful bond language, and that we're structuring our proposed debt in the manner that is most financially advantageous to the city. We want to alleviate the risk of going back to the voters numerous times or asking them for rate and fee increases in less than a coordinated fashion. We want to make sure that our message is based on sound research and is supportable by the studies that we have done. I think it's also important to mitigate the risk of a bond failure. Rushing into a bond without sufficient communication, education, conversation, and study increases the risk that the voters will say, we don't think you're quite ready for this at this point, which makes it even more difficult to go back another year to ask them. So for those reasons, we are still recommending that 2020 comprehensive bond, that City Council consider that. But the decision, I'm very glad to say, is not mine. It's a City Council decision. And you have some important and I think very difficult decisions to make about how to use the resources that the citizens have entrusted us with. Up in the left-hand corner, we're talking about the basic project list. This is that initial request of $15 million that you have in your packet. We could appropriate the 14.1 million that Director Sabata just mentioned, but one of the first decisions that council will need to make is how much of those available funds over and above our reserve requirements do you want to put into capital or operational expenses? So that's question number one. And that could be part of the 14.1, it could be all of it, it could be none of it, that's your decision. But for purposes of this discussion, we're just saying, let's assume that we appropriate the entire 14 million. It would use all of those savings, it would deplete the long-term asset reserve fund. But in red, you will see that we've put what we consider some of the risks on that decision. Clearly, it only addresses a small percentage of the city's capital needs. $17 million does not include storm drainage improvements at this point. Over on the other side, where we say the reduced basic project list, let's say, again, for purposes of discussion, that you decided to make use of all the 14 million that we may have available. We could appropriate 11 million of that to our basic capital and divert 3 million for stormwater project design and construction, get that up and moving. Again, the risks with that decision is it still only addresses a small percentage of our city's short-term and long-term capital needs, and it doesn't address a significant general fund or enterprise fund needs. The 2019 possible limited bond, it could be parks and recreation. We could say we're going to put some money into stormwater projects. Again, I would reiterate that without a comprehensive rate and fee study, we would be at a disadvantage going out to bonding agencies, so it would be later in the year. It is the risks of that. We would be spending money or asking the citizens for money with limited project coordination, parks working with storm drainage is my key example, and limited citizen engagement and conversation. It still doesn't meet all of our significant needs. We recognize that, and it's a very difficult prioritization project. Where would we put those limited funds? How would we know that that's meeting the most important needs of the city? The risk of failure is there. If we're asking for money on a continual basis, bond fatigue or rate fatigue could set in. Another option is that 2020 possible comprehensive bond, depending on how much money we wanted to put in. Obviously, that would be a continuing discussion. Part of the reason we want to coordinate that with the citizens. The risk of that is that it is a delayed response. We have all heard from our citizens that they want improvements and they want them sooner rather than later. I would reiterate that we would be doing a lot in early 2020. For instance, as Director Lee said about Parks and Rec, we're asking in our basic capital for almost $1 million to do construction drawings for the parks so that we would be shovel ready, hit the ground running. Even if we allocated money in November of 2019, we still have to spend some time and energy and money to get the construction drawings out. We have a rough idea of what we do from a conceptual design, but not all those details. In 2020, the citizens could decide we don't want to wait that long and go ahead and initiate a ballot for a bonding for Parks and Rec in 2019. Certainly there's support for that, and I can appreciate their interest in going for that. So as I say, there are varieties of these options too. This is not, the only choices you have, but we've tried to prioritize them and group them in a way that made sense. But all those are the questions that we're asking council to consider as we go forward.
Okay. So we certainly can go back to that slide as we begin the discussion portion of this meeting. Again, staff truly appreciates your time this morning to review the very initial stages of the budget development with you. We appreciate that. We clearly are at the beginning in talking about our requests, but we believe that these are comprehensive requests. There's been a lot of thought that has gone into this information that we've shared with you this morning. And of course, based on your feedback and the directive that you provide to us, we will continue to build the detailed budgets. And again, I leave it up to you as a group as to how we best answer those questions that you may have after today's meeting. And then I'd also like to ask how you'd like to move forward today in addressing any questions you may have for any of the directors related to their specific plans and capital needs for 2020. So with that, we're well ahead of schedule, which is good, but we open it up to council to direct us further. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for the presentation and all of the great work that's gone into it. This is the first time I have ever seen this much of the financial dollars going with projects this early in the year, so I really appreciate that. It gives us a lot of time to play out what would happen if we did this, if we didn't do that, and start to play out some scenarios. So for this morning, you want us to ask questions about each one of the departmental sort of areas? Is that what you're wanting? And then any discussion around those? Is that how you want to proceed?
It's up to you, but I think it might be time well spent because the directors are here.
They're here.
And if you'd like to address them individually, like talk about specific areas, we could have them come back to the table as we go. We could go back to the original slides and we could work through each one. Whatever your pleasure is.
Okay. Councilman Request, you look like you're going to push a button. Go for it.
I have a few questions to specific directors, and I'm not sure if we go around the table if we're going to have the directors coming up and down.
Right.
If we do, just want to go through the order again.
I think that would make the most sense to try and get ourselves to limit questions maybe to an hour or 45 minutes unless we have more. If we have to spend the whole time just asking questions because this is way ahead of, we're in May. We have several more months to work this out, but let's start with that. Let's start with the first group up was
the city manager.
City manager's office, yeah. So let's start with that area. Council, what kinds of questions do you have for our city manager's office? Nothing.
Yeah, and I will.
Oh yeah, it's hard on the.
And I will reiterate that I'll provide more information about that, my proposed neighborhood liaison, communication piece, and certainly more information about the emergency manager and that program as we continue discussions with Arapahoe County and what might that look like. But these are our placeholders as we discuss those suggestions.
Great. Councilmember Martinez.
Yeah, my question was just related to the neighborhood liaison pilot project. Can you reiterate again what kind of would be the intention or the goal behind it? It's mostly a communications piece. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And what we're hoping to do is a more coordinated, getting all the departments on the same boat and making it really, really clear to our citizens how to seamlessly ask a question of their city servants, so that you ask a question and we say, oh, you need to call Public Works for that, or oh, you need to talk to our zoning folks. I think that creates a lot of unnecessary confusion for our citizens. So we all are trying to do the best, but I think we need somebody to pull us together and make sure that our systems are delivering that top level of customer service.
Okay.
Does
And
that
then
help?
yes, it does. Thank you. And then the second question is formalize emergency management. Thrilled that that's on here. So we're thinking that we'll go forward with the Arapahoe County option that we've discussed, and then in 2020 hire a emergency manager full-time position.
It will be up to council. Initial discussions with Arapahoe County, I think, are very interesting in terms of how we could share resources. But I thought it was important to put the placeholder in here. I mean, working with Arapahoe County they're required to provide us disaster relief, but not help us with the emergency plan and training and all those sorts of things. So there will be an expense to emergency management, whether city council decides that that's a full-time position, or if we want to put some of that money toward a cooperative arrangement with Arapahoe County, we'll come back to you. But this is a rough budget number. I just wanted to put that in as a placeholder.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Councilmember Wink?
Thanks, Mayor. Manager Hargrove, the proposed deputy city manager position that you mentioned.
The city clerk.
Yes. Was that solely around supporting this pilot project? It
No.
seemed that way, but
forgive me for that. No, the deputy city clerk is a records access and document management
okay, perfect.
person.
You'd moved on, which will support some of the volume of the
Right.
Right.
And we have a huge backlog, frankly, of paper contracts and purchase orders, and our records retention requirements from the state are. We want to make sure that all of our departments are following all those records retentions as efficiently as possible, and so that all of those documents are easily and readily accessible for our community. It's a key function of the deputy clerk's, of the city clerk's office. It's been on the back burner too long.
Good. And last year when council met for our one-day retreat, I don't remember if it was May or February, but last year, I remember us talking about and on some level prioritizing the importance of having a centralized point of communication for the city, wherever that was housed and however that was implemented. So to see that move forward, and at least us looking to a pilot project, we can assess how that's working and whether or not that's the way to go. So I'm glad to hear that we're implementing this.
Thank you. I do think it's a priority.
Yeah.
I also had a question about the neighborhood liaison. Would this come with a very specific web portal and a phone number that could be like a 311 or something or whatever?
Yes, yes, and yes. I mean, that's one thing that I would like this temporary position to help guide, task force of other people in the city who are already working on this project. Mm-hmm. But we have a mobile system, the My Englewood Q alert system. We have phone calls, there are web portals. So the idea is to coordinate all of our different points of contact. I don't want to end up with only one way to contact, but if you make a phone call, if you use the mobile app, it should all go into one central repository so that citizens don't have to be bounced around to different departments. And that's one reason that I put this in as a temporary position. Doing the research, putting the processes in place, is this something that can be maintained by departments and with some focus and leadership from the city manager's office, or would that single point of contact person be required to manage it? I don't have the answer to that, but hopefully if we set up the systems, they might be self-sustaining.
Great. I don't see any further questions for you. So Municipal Court actually is the next presentation, right? So City Attorney's Office didn't have anything in increases. So Municipal Court, is there any questions about that? Councilmember Wink.
So to what degree will the court better address mental health and addiction issues?
We are currently partnering, in addition with the police department. Our probation officer refers a lot of our customers that are in need to all health services, the same type of community partnerships that we have with them. We've reached out to some of the faith-based areas, the nonprofits that are in the area to have resources for our clients that may need them. So those are the types of things, obviously we have addiction issues. For years we have always, upon a finding or plea of guilty, have had persons that it was applicable to go through rehabilitation kind of services. And so those are the types of things. And we just want to continue to improve upon those partnerships within the community.
Okay, thank you. I was going to follow up and ask what changes are going to be made or what's different moving forward. So it's simply a continual improvement process upon what you've been
That's
the way
correct.
you've been liaising
Correct.
with community partners to support
Yes.
the clients. Okay.
We don't anticipate this having actually a budgetary impact,
Sure.
just, an ability to have resources for the
Okay,
community.
thank you so much, Tammy.
Thank you. Further questions for the court, municipal court? So I would, I'm going to follow up with that. So are you discovering that you have a higher, that the supply and the demand is out of sync at all on this? Like there's not enough places to find
That there's
help?
not a place to find help? No, I
Right.
think that there are resources out there. It's the getting the clients to the proper resources, I think, that is sometimes the most strategic thing that we need to do. Juveniles are another area. We want to continue. We want to improve our relationships with the schools, those types of things, to make sure that we're, I know that there are truancy programs there, those types of things, and we want to make sure to be coordinating. It's more of a coordination effort than a mandate, if you will, but it certainly is, what police are experiencing on the street, eventually we experience within our own courtroom. So,
Is there also, I didn't see as a priority sort of the timeline from citation to hearing to finishing it out. Do we know, I think there was something when we did the salary increase for the judge on that, but do you have current data on how we're doing in terms of how long it takes to get cases through and whether we're on par with others or not?
I don't necessarily have specific data that I can reference for you right this minute, but yes, we're legally mandated to get most things through within, from plea of not guilty to trial within 91 days. Mm-hmm. So we certainly meet those mandates, those legal requirements. Domestic violence is a really good example of us fast tracking, someone that's, if something happens today, we will see them on video on Monday. So we try and address those types of issues immediately. We also fast track some of our code issues. If the code officers, it may be a specific dog issue, comes to mind that if there was a dangerous dog, that those get fast tracked, and we see those much more quickly too. So it's a kind of a case-by-case basis, but it certainly is something that we try and address as quickly as we can. And that's the advantage of a municipal court. Because we are at the local level, there's not as much bureaucracy, if you will. We're able to address those issues much more immediately than say a county or a district court often can.
So that's what I hear from you all, and when I do get a complaint, and I always try and push them your way because it's not my thing, is that it takes too long for something to get through. And I've said, well, there's court mandate, or there's mandated state laws that say it has to be done by certain times. I'm sure you're meeting those, yeah, because we'd hear about it if you weren't. So is there a way to actually get that data out so that we can dispel myths, or that you all have it online? I don't know if you do, where I can shoot people to that.
We don't. What I could do is probably, our current software system is a little archaic and not as user-friendly. I probably could still get some sort of a disposition type of report out to you, and how quickly that happens. The other thing that I think people often, the community may not have an appreciation of, are due process rights, that where obviously it's a volatile situation, or it's something that people consider to be really critical to them personally, and why can't the court move this on further? Well, there are rights that people have, and we have to, certainly adhere to those too. So it's a two-sided,
absolutely
situation.
Thank you. I don't think it looks like anybody else has questions on this one. Next one up would be the human resources, correct? Questions about HR, priorities, initiatives, and funding? No one has a question?
Well,
Councilmember Wink?
Director Gonzalez is coming up again later, right? I remember her speaking twice before.
She was at the very, very beginning before we got going on this, and yeah, but this is her segment for priorities and funding.
Why don't you
Go ahead, Councilmember Sierra.
Director, you made a comment that you were hoping that this new payroll system would be net neutral. Did I understand that correctly, or in terms of costs
Yes,
for the current system?
Is this working?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, we are hoping to be net neutral. We won't know until we get the RFP. We're going to stop paying what we're paying right now and start paying the new system. That's what we're shooting for.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wink.
Thank you. On some level, I'm curious to hear, Mayor, Director Gonzalez overview or overall assessment of the total FTE requests. Well, not FTE really, but staffing requests that we've heard about today, given sort of her position in the totality of the proposed budget. So I'm curious for that. I don't know.
Without going into boring details for everybody, we're starting to do a lot of staff analysis. It's not about more or less or how much we pay. It's about having the right talent to offer the right service. That's what we're going for. And all the requests that you have seen today have been thoroughly analyzed and see, okay, why do we need this person? Because we have this lack of service here, or we need to improve how we're doing things, and we need the specialized talents to bring into the city. So we're looking for places where we can be more efficient. It's not about more or less, it's about efficiency. We do have a lot of talent, and we are finding out, we move people, we rewrite job descriptions, and we find that people is flourishing with the new duties. Because it's about, again, as I said, there are two pieces. It's the cost of doing business. That's one piece, and that's when we need more people, because we cannot serve the community as it stands today with the same services that we have 5 or 10 years ago. But on the other side is putting the right talent or the right resource in the right place. We have a lot of people that have a lot of knowledge, and what they were doing before is no longer doing it, but that doesn't mean that they are discarded. We need to make sure that we combine both the resources that we have now and the resources that we're going to have in the future, and do it effectively and efficiently.
Perfect. Thank you.
Councilmember Barentine.
So I just want to clarify what you said. So for each of the positions that are in this list, you have done a job description and analysis of the need, and those are available for us.
Yes, most of the positions that we have in the, like the one that we're doing as a trial doesn't have a job description yet because we're working on the project. But for every other position, we have job descriptions and compensation analysis for all of them.
Okay, and I just would like for that to be made available for the 12 that I've counted up so far. So I appreciate that you've done that work, and if it's available, I'd like to have it.
Sure.
Could you tell me a little bit more about what the role of the generalist would be for the coverage of city needs? You said they'd be going out into the different areas.
No, what we have is we have 3 business partners right now, and those serve the departments. So we have a business partner that covers Park and Rec. So they do anything from payments and issues with payroll to hiring and recruiting and all of that. Used to be that they would sit in the office and the departments will come to us, the people will come to us. I believe that we have to service on the point of service. It's more effective for my business partner to be at the wastewater plant. Actually, right now it's 2 times a week. So when employees have an issue, they can go right there where they work to their business partner and ask and say, I don't know, I need help with my insurance. I'm having an issue with Cigna. I need to ask for vacation. I don't know how to do it. That business partners is sitting at the place of work instead of sitting here at the Civic Center. In order for us to do that, to have those 3 people go out of the office, I need office coverage.
That makes sense.
That's what we're asking for generally. Somebody that will stay in the office and do close the recruiting or receive paperwork or send paperwork, run reports, and stuff like that.
Thank you. That makes sense. All right. Next area is the finance department. Right? No?
Thank you.
Yep. Yes, it is. Any questions for finance department? All right. Looks like that one's good. Okay. Councilmember Martinez.
On the additional staff person,
Yes.
it says it would support finance, HR, and IT. Would those departments also help to fund this position, or would it only be from a finance fund?
I think that is yet to be determined,
Okay.
quite frankly. Yeah, we need to have more discussions about that.
Okay, thank you.
Next is IT. IT department. Any questions for information technology? Councilmember Cuesta.
Good morning. To the let's see here, is the purchase regarding the rugged computers to outfit to the police officers. So I'm just trying to make sure that I understand how that would work then. We would outfit each officer with one of these rugged computers. That would then follow them entirely throughout their day. So they would use that in their vehicle. They would use that as their desk, eliminating the need for a computer in the vehicle and at the desk?
Correct.
Understood.
Yes.
Thank you. And then the second one was the fiber, linking all the buildings through Englewood's own fiber. What is the benefit of that as opposed to using, well, what are we using now? I guess would be my question.
We're using carrier services.
And what's the advantage to housing that internally as opposed to using a carrier service?
Yeah. So in addition to the financial piece of it, it's also keeping our data secure. We're not using outside carriers. We're keeping it all within our own network.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Great. Any other questions on those? I have a little bit. Those were the two I had on this one, rugged computers, which is an interesting concept. And then the ROI on the fiber. So what the financial piece of it is what you will be saving in the long run?
We're saving in the long run with the carrier services that we're not going to need between the buildings. We still need internet, but this is the internal LAN piece.
Do you know what the savings will be over time?
I do not.
Can you figure that out at some point? And
we can definitely look at that. We're going to start the planning on that one.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't expect it today, but if there's a way to figure out what the return on investment is over, 1 year, 3 or 5 years or something, would be helpful.
Okay. Yes.
All right, Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. On the capital request for the audiovisual for the council chambers, I see that's like 200,000. If those improvements are made, would we still then need a part-time person for the technician?
These are equipment upgrades. The equipment is outdated, so this is only equipment. The technician would run the meetings, the audio and the video in both study session and regular council.
So yes, we would need them no matter what upgrades to equipment we make.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Cuesta, did you just not turn your light off? Okay, that's right. Next is community development. Any questions for community development? Councilmember Cuesta.
Good morning, Mr. Power, and I'm getting to that portion of the presentation. The first one was that you mentioned that the Weingartner property had been sold. That is finalized at this point. Well, I guess there's due diligence involved, did you mention?
So to clarify, the servicer out of Texas was responsible for essentially disposing that portion of the property on behalf of the investors. And that is the part that's happened. They have selected a buyer. They have not closed on the property. I believe the buyer has approximately 2 months for a due diligence phase. So they're going through their process to actually get to a closing probably in the early to mid part of the summer.
Has Englewood been made aware of who that buyer is?
Yes, and we have spoken to them.
Now, it was, I believe, at the end of March, maybe at the end of April, pardon me, that Mr. Paremba came up and presented. And there was one group that was both in the running for the Weingart property as well as had interest here.
Right.
Any chance that that was the buyer selected?
It is not. And that adds not only a degree of complexity, but just another layer of work that we're going to have to do. If this buyer does close, and I can just tell you because they said that they weren't opposed to us disclosing it. It's a group out of Southern California called CityVest Commercial. And if they close, they will not be the same presenter in terms of the city parcels because there are 3 separate development entities that are still in the mix for the RFP response that is due next week on the city parcels on City Center. So we've already had discussions with the representatives of City Vest about that issue. They're very much aware of it, and they've pledged at this point to work with us and whoever that may be in terms of the selected person that or selected entity that you make relative to the city parcels, that we try to pull the three groups together in terms of moving forward.
Thank you. That's good information. I appreciate it. The second component being the review of Title 16, which I think is certainly worthy of discussion and maybe really worthwhile endeavor. Excuse me. Is there anything that prevents that conversation from beginning in 2019? It's a pretty extended time frame, and I certainly appreciate the magnitude of it as well. But is there anything that would prohibit at least the beginning of that in 2019 as opposed to waiting to 2020? Are there financial constraints from starting that?
There would be financial constraints in terms of our professional services budget for this year. So if you wanted to do a supplemental, we could certainly accelerate that first phase, which is what we would be calling the community assessment. And as I mentioned in my initial presentation, there are several things that we are doing currently with Title 16 in partnership with the Planning and Zoning Commission that you'll be seeing over the course of the year. And I mentioned a couple of them, specifically short-term rentals in the plan unit development portion of the ordinance. Those are carrying forward. And so our thought is as a more comprehensive review of Title 16 were to happen, those changes would either be folded in or they'd be amended subsequent to it. But no, there is nothing that could accelerate it into 2019. But I would caution that this is a major endeavor, an undertaking to go through a comprehensive reassessment of our entitled land use ordinance, and it will take some time and attention to do it correctly.
Very good. Thank you.
Questions, Councilmember Martinez?
Thank you. I had a similar question as Cuesta, so thanks for asking that. So that helps me. And I'm really happy to see the home repair program on here. How far are you in terms of like fleshing that out, or is that still in the beginning kind of phases?
So we're in the beginning phases of that, and one of the things that I wanted to say now that I didn't say in my initial comments is if we did it at approximately $100,000 a year, it would give us about 8 or so years under this type of program, because the balance of Fund 46 right now is about $850,000. Our initial thoughts, as I said, it would essentially somewhat mirror the E3 program, which those homeowners provide and make the improvements, and essentially it's a forgivable loan against their property. So if they ever sell the property or there's some major change, then the payback to the city is from the proceeds of the sale. We're thinking of something like that in this loan program. We're still talking about income requirements and that type of thing to qualify. And of course, we would be coming back to you as we get more information together from our perspective for you to make some decisions on whether or not you want to carry forward on this. And we anticipate doing that sometime over the summer.
Fantastic. I'm wondering too if it would just be kind of like inside the home, or if things outside the home, such as trees, fences, things like that, would be included.
It would apply to, as I said, the focus would be on emergency repairs, and it would apply for both some internal and external improvements.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell?
That question about the emergency home repairs, what really kept us, since that is spending money that's already there, I mean, that we haven't, what kept us from really perhaps accessing this idea with the flood victims?
That's a fair question. We did have the other programs that we did in terms of the recovery, and we used that out of our economic development funds. We could have tapped this fund. I just don't think it occurred to us, frankly.
Okay, thank you. And then my other questions are about the Title 16. I appreciate those questions. You suggested that we want to get someone to facilitate the discussions.
Our idea was to have some type of community input process before you go through the technical rewriting and redrafting of the title, and so that was part of our assumption for the request, yes.
Okay, so if, and the land use direction that we're going, and how is the comp plan tied into this? Are we going to rewrite Title 16 compared to the comp plan, or?
I
vice
think the
versa?
comp plan is a model for a departure point on Title 16. And so I think one of the things that we could do with the community is to identify the major conclusions of the comprehensive plan and then start to talk about how Title 16 starts to be reshaped to either reflect those goals or the goals that the community goes through in terms of the community assessment itself.
Thank you.
Councilmember Valentine.
You've acknowledged that the sale of the property does create some complexities with the process that we're currently doing. Is there when does the city's when does that property come back under the city's ownership?
The term of the lease, the ground lease that is going to be acquired essentially by City Vest would be approximately 56 years in terms of the term.
That's not my, I apologize if I didn't make that clear. The property that you're putting RFPs out, when does that come under city ownership? It's currently owned by EAF. It's not owned by the city. The RFPs that you're looking to have other...
Right. I believe that's tied, and the EAF people can talk to this maybe a little bit further than I can, but the EAF obligations on this property are in 2023.
Okay. So is there, since you've acknowledged that there's some complexities in having this owner come forward while we're doing RFPs for the city properties, is there a possibility that we might be able to, one, wait for the new city manager, and two, go ahead and see what the new owners are bringing forward and see if we have a possibility to go ahead and partner with them rather than what seems like just kind of acknowledging that we're going to have this triad going on and not as good a partnership. Wouldn't we be able to have some time to wait for that?
So I'll defer to council on the first question, and we are not waiting on the second question. We have made it abundantly clear to the potential buyer of the former Weingarten site that we want to play the facilitative role between all of the parties on this site and have a positive outcome. And they've voiced their pledge to participate in that honestly, forthrightly, and at this point, we see that as an opportunity, not a hindrance. It's complicated, but it's not a hindrance.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta?
Well, I didn't have a question, but I will I think that Mayor Pro Tem Russell brought up an interesting point being, should Title 16 be driving the comp plan or the comp plan driving Title 16? And as we go further down that road, that's probably something we should keep in mind. That's a whole nother separate conversation too, but I think that's a very interesting point there. Thank you.
Yeah, on that note, it for sure has to be read side by side because we have always said from the beginning of that new comp plan that it's a living, breathing document that could be shaped and changed over time. It should never be viewed as something that's in cement. So if we start to see some things changing in the environment and our public in terms of what we want, that's the time. And I think Title 16 would actually give us the opportunity to do that. So I agree with you. They have got to be looked at side by side, and it might be the place where we get to do rewritings of segments if we want. Councilmember Barentine.
Just to address the statement you just made, Council has had a fundamental disagreement and ongoing conversation on whether that's a fluid and ever-changing document that doesn't lend for some stability, both in investment and people understanding how to use that document. So I believe that still has to be a conversation among council. I appreciate your sharing your viewpoint on it, but I think that there's I don't think that that's the cemented understanding of what zoning is or land use. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Thanks. Zoning definitely is set, and we'll have to, if we're going to change that, we'd have to change it. Councilmember Sierra.
So just real quick, initial question regarding the home repair program. Was that the old home rehabilitation program?
I believe it was,
okay.
Yes.
So then moving on to Title 16, I brought up a council request on Monday night regarding staff and planning and zoning looking into recommendations regarding how builders and developers, or how we can better require them to bring our properties back into like the original state. So I still see that as a narrow scope that we can still move forward with that here in 2019 and still get a recommendation. So I guess my question is, do you agree with that assessment that it won't? We're looking at a bigger picture for this assessment, so I just want to make sure that that's just narrow in scope, that we can still move forward with that.
Yes, we could still move forward with the assessment of those options in addition to the other ones that I talked about, and even some minor ones. And the idea is once the community starts to talk about the entirety of Title 16, those changes that may be made between now and frankly 2021, which would be the rewriting of that portion of the ordinance, those portions will be plugged in.
Okay. So then I guess moving forward, is there anything else that is needed from staff or in order for planning and zoning to start looking at those options or those recommendations?
Well, my conversation was I'd like to know that consensus of City Council wants to move forward on that. And this is a wonderful time to ask that question. So that'd be great.
Do you want to hold it? Do you want to do it now?
No, we can hold
Okay.
because actually there's
Another item?
well, moving forward with
Can you use
the microphone? Yeah.
yeah, I think we could probably have a discussion afterwards because I still have questions that kind of touch on that with Public Works as well as the police department.
Yeah. All right. I do have one other question, and it's related to what Councilmember Cuesta asked again so Title 16 hasn't really, the last time was done in 2004. Obviously, we need to really think this through again. And it's $50,000 for the assessment. And so we could start it this year if we did a special appropriation for that.
We would certainly
you be equipped to help launch something like that if we decided to do it by end of summer or something?
We'll commit to that. If you wanted to accelerate it, we obviously need to work it through and incorporate it into the Planning Commission's work plan. And so having some discussions with them about the explicit timing of their role in it is still something that we would need to do. But if you chose to accelerate the process, we would certainly work that into our work plan.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next area is Parks and Rec. Mr. Lee. Oh, sorry. Questions for Mr. Lee? I have a question. I'm trying to read how have the new, oh, yeah. Do you have any sense of how the new, a number of the new small businesses that are focused on exercise, different kinds of exercise impacted our recreation facilities? Have you been able to kind of get a read on that?
I'm not sure we have a clear read on that. You know, obviously, when you have a lot of competition, it has some impact, but I don't know that we've gauged how much. There are a lot of those little places up and down Broadway, in the marketplace. We've got another one going in down at Bellevue and Broadway as well, Choose, and I think they will have an impact. I also, as I go by some of the larger apartment complexes, I see people in their exercise facilities as well.
Is there a way to do sort of an assessment to see if, when they open up, whether there's a dip or any kind of point in time tracking that you're doing or analysis?
I don't know that we're doing any tracking. I'm sure we could try to look at something.
Because it would help, I think, to know whether the public's choosing to go to the more private places than to the public amenities for this, and maybe there's a shifting in the way we do things as a result.
I would also point out that it's an indication of an increased demand.
Yeah.
So the market itself is expanding, but we can certainly do more analysis.
Sure. Well, it'd be great to see that we're not, it's not really impacting us and that people are just exercising more and living healthy lives. That'd be great news too. We have a healthy city.
I think there's a niche for certain areas, and I think people look for different amenities. Certainly we're different than a Choose, and we're different than just a Pilates or a yoga studio.
Great. I'm not sure if Councilmember Sierra's light was on. Okay, go ahead, and then Mr. Cuesta. Or, okay, was he first? All right.
Morning, Mr. Lee. The Pirates Cove renovation and the capital requests for $1 million. You may have touched on the details of that in the past. Do you mind giving me a quick overview again of what you would expect to spend that $1 million on?
There's some repair and maintenance issues as well as a major amenity going back in there. What that amenity would be, I'm not completely sure at this point.
We were talking about replacing the central play structure, the bucket. We don't want the bucket to fail. I would also point out that we have saved almost $1 million in the Conservation Trust Fund to leverage the $1 million, because that's about the total cost of that renovation would be about $2 million.
Thank you. And secondly, with the park planning, design, and project management, which parks are you targeting?
Again, we're looking at Cushing, we're looking at Miller Field, and we're looking at Jason as the three major parks.
Thank you. Romans is not in the discussion at this time.
Romans is not in the discussion, but it certainly, if there were a $30 million bond, a lot of that money would be stretched out into some of the other parks.
Thank you. I guess one more follow-up to that then. So Jason has the grant money coming as well.
That's correct. We have a playground coming this year.
And then this planning would be for improvements in addition to what that grant will provide?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, we have to look at the restrooms there, the picnic shelter, the irrigation systems.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks. Can you tell me the three again? My pen wasn't working.
Cushing, Jason, and Miller Field.
And Miller Field. Okay, great. Thanks.
Are the top priorities.
Councilmember Sierra.
Could you remind me again what the current spend is on the maintenance for the medians along Santa Fe and Hampton?
They are being done monthly.
But do we know what the spend is or the cost is within the budget?
It's $146,000.
Perfect. And then regarding the park planning, we'll use the police department as an example. Is that when, before the bond passed, was that done prior, was that design and planning done prior to the bond passing for the police department, or is that something that happened after the bond passed?
The majority of the design and construction was, the design drawings and the construction information was done prior to the bond. There was more finished as we continued through the project, but the majority of the planning had been done before we went for a bond.
Thank you.
Councilmember Martinez.
For the park planning, design, and project management, would there be any overlap with the position of that Public Works is requesting for an additional project manager, or would those be totally independent of one another?
I think there would be some overlap. We've relied on Public Works heavily to help with project management on a number of our projects.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Cuesta. Oh, Councilmember, forget it. All right, police, next one up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions for Chief Collins? Councilmember Sierra.
So I'm actually jumping Public Works. So one of the items that came up during the alley discussion was the fact that
he's
no, I know.
Yeah, he's getting there. I know he's
because
getting
it was
there.
the Public Works. So Director DeAndre stated that one of the aspects of bringing back the conditions of the alley to its state is that better enforcement. So I guess my question is, this is a long-winded question. I guess it's not really, it's going to be more of a comment than actually something that you can answer at this point. Sure. But if we were to move forward with any changes to Title 16, that would require more enforcement. I guess my comment is just that we make sure that we have the staff within code enforcement across all hours that builders are able or permitted to do work within the city, that there is a shift or at least a process that citizens can call in if those aren't being met.
Okay. Got it.
That was a question, a comment. Councilmember Wink.
Chief Collins, do you mind describing a bit, in a bit more detail, the Smart Force?
It's a crime analysis tool. It's a web-based program for us.
Mhm.
And not only does it allow us to disseminate to the officers in the field crime intelligence information, it also has some other administrative tools as well. And officers get information much quicker and more timelier, and it's fresher. And we felt it was a very good program to provide to them out in the field.
Sure. So does it eliminate some of the need for the patrol officers, for example, to have to rely solely on that the sergeant that's back at the headquarters during their shift for that communication? I mean, is it something they'll be able to access on their rugged computers, for example?
We used to use OneNote.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
that was at roll call every day,
right.
And that was not accessible to the officers in the field. And so if an officer wants to refresh his memory, find a wanted poster or something like that, he just needs to access the MDT and it'll be right there. And
thank you. And since I have you here, the rugged computers, which was Margaret Brocklander's piece, that's something, do you envision the officers using or having with them and logging into, leveraging during their roll call so they're more prepped before they go into their vehicles? I've done so many ride-alongs. There's a lot of sitting and, trying to hurriedly go through that process of queuing up that patrol car computer
yes,
right now.
and especially when they're in the field. This has been a complaint for quite some time that, they may go to Swedish Hospital and be there for quite some time, let's say with an
right.
RSD or something. And they have been asking if they could take the current laptops out of the car and into the hospital. But it has something to do with CJIS, which means it violates CJIS security. So we've been telling them you can't do that. Now with the notebooks, it's my understanding that they're very mobile and probably more efficient and more productive, if you will. And so, I really do like the concept.
I'd love to see the data on that. If it's approved, if we move forward and we implement them, and the impact on your objectives as a law enforcement team in terms of protection and usurping, bigger problems earlier, the efficiency of your operations. Mm-hmm. So thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Sierra.
This may be more of a question for Margaret. I'm sorry, Brocklander. But if we were to go to the rugged computers, would we need Wi-Fi cards or anything, an additional cost to the rugged cards or rugged computers?
Today we maintain equipment in the car so that they have services, and those services would continue. But there wouldn't be additional on top of that.
Thank you.
So if they did go into Swedish Hospital and wanted to work, they really couldn't work?
Well, they can because their phones are hotspots.
Okay, so they just use their phone hotspot. All right, that would be allowed.
Or they have the public wireless in Swedish.
Okay. All right.
Depending on what they're doing.
Other questions for police on this? I've done ride-alongs too, and it seems like the computers just don't get used because it's too cumbersome. So it's a lot of equipment in a car, and they go off in a parking lot and write things up via that, but they don't seem to service them to the extent that they could be. So I could see why this is being asked for. All right, thank you. Next one up is Public Works. Any questions for Public Works? Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. In regards to the established levels of service in each division, I think that's a really smart thing for us to be doing. How would we go about doing that for each division? Would it just vary greatly depending on which division you're talking about?
Yeah, I can expand a little bit on that. So I'll use the sweeping example, I believe, that I used earlier. So right now, First, I think the process that we'd go about is what are we doing now? And that's kind of what I spent the last year doing. So I've been here just about 11 months now and have been assessing the department. And so, for example, with sweeping, I was told by staff, well, we sweep every day. And I'm like, oh, do we need to? I think is the question. And is it effective? So I think that's the first thing, is how much are we doing, and then assessing how much does that cost, and is it meeting the needs of the community? So right now we sweep every day, but we sweep down the middle of the street, for example. And so I really think we could be more effective by setting up a spring and a fall sweeping where we're only sweeping twice a year. It might take a few weeks, to get through the whole city, spring and fall. But I think then putting those other resources that we're sweeping every day towards something else. And so those are exactly the type of programmatic effects that we're going to look at in each division. So in building, what is our custodial doing? Is it the right level? And can we achieve that with the funding that we have? If somebody then asks and say, hey, I want my office vacuumed every day. Okay, we can look at that, but then what does that cost additionally to make that level of service? And maybe collectively, then we can have that discussion. So does that help a little bit?
Yes, it does.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Councilmember Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. Director Maria, you made mention of the sealant, potential sealant for the tops of the alleyways. And then I believe you discussed permanently paving the alleys. So what is the sealant called again?
It's a proprietary material called DuraBlend.
Right. So is the application of DuraBlend a precursor to the process and the whatever product might be used to seal? So we're not spending dollars that are then going to be rendered moot if we do end up paving the alleys.
There was one slide. So we have roughly 320 alleys that are currently unpaved. So if we did 10 a year, it would take us roughly 32 years to complete that process.
Perfect.
So, and even at 10 a year, we're saying that's going to cost us $2.6 million. So a lot of money. So I think the benefit of the DuraBlend product and us doing that fine grading is that we know we're not going to get to everybody right away. So whatever process we end up coming with of prioritizing alleys, we have to address how do we maintain the other ones, the other 310, going forward until next year. And so I think this is, beyond what we've always done in the past, which is simply grading with a very large piece of machinery, doing a little bit more work so that we can keep them in a higher level of condition. And so we think this is a worthy investment to keep those going in the long term.
Beautiful. And thank you very much for that new program online. I've shared it with several citizens, and they're super excited about it.
We're going to do something similar for potholes, too.
Oh, good. Very good. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. The question that I have about the DuraBlend, because apparently you shared that water just sheets off of it. How will that impact the flooding situation if we have a major rain?
Yeah, so I think unlike it's not to the level of sheeting off that a paved surface would be, but it would certainly, in the sense that it would, again, if we're grading, let's just say there's a high point in the middle and it drains to either end of the alley, that would facilitate getting the water out instead of pooling in low spots within the alley. So the intent is not to have that go off onto private property, just that it drains off in the way that it's meant to be out to the side streets.
Okay, thank you. And then in the flood study, is there going to be anything in there that talks about paving alleys and how that would impact the flood area? Or are we going to need a study to figure out whether we ought to pave the alleys or not? Because a lot of Englewood is in flood zones.
Correct. The caliber study will not address alleys specifically. I'm doing some research on my own just to look at what's the permeability rate. Typically what you're going to see with these permeable pavers, they're almost like large squares with open holes. I had showed Dorothy a picture yesterday or last week of some options. So what it does, it's a strong enough material. It's almost think like paver blocks, but with openings in them. And so you put a material underneath, probably a good, at least 6 inches, if not more, kind of like a graded material, like a granite. Place these on top and fill all those holes with the granite material as well, so that you're getting, and these products actually have a rate of permeability, how much water soaks in versus shedding off. And so I don't think we're going to need a separate study to address that. What we want to make sure is that that permeability rate is enough that it will address the problem without exacerbating more stormwater runoff into the streets.
Thank you. And then just, so the figures that you have given us, the estimates of what it's going to cost to pave the alleys, does that include what it would cost to do it with the permeable surface?
That's what I'm still trying to figure out. I've made that relatively conservative. I'm hoping, there's so many, because of the interest in sustainability, trying to look at more of low impact for stormwater in general throughout the United States, that these products are coming down in cost and that they're relatively similar to what an asphalt or a concrete alley would cost. But I still haven't verified that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Director DeAndre? Nope. Looks good. All right, next is utilities. Questions for Director Brennan? Councilmember Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Brennan, when you talked about the elimination of dead-end mains, which in part would increase the quality of the water, do you mind giving me a little bit more information about that process, what happens, and to what degree they currently impact the quality of the water? Because I don't know.
Yes. We currently have about 15 mains that don't dead end. That dead end, excuse me.
How long are these? Like, what's the dimension?
They vary in length from, say 50 feet up to 300. And the reason it really affects water quality is you do not get circulation. If there is no demand on it, it is stagnant water. And water is a perishable product. You like to keep it moving. And that's our goal.
So to eliminate the dead-end mains, you simply cease feeding water to those, through those, or do you block them off?
We're actually going to connect them into the distribution system. So we'll eliminate the dead end by piping them to the next closest main.
Ah, very good. Thank you.
Further questions? Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
When is the last time we've replaced water mains?
I believe it was 3 years ago. With our crew downsizing, currently we are going after valves. We have about 2,000 valves in the system, and we are operating them right now. And as we identify issues, we're replacing the valves. So in 19 and 20, our goal right now, it looks like we're going to have to replace about 120 to 140 valves.
Thank you.
I have a question about lead. And when we do replace some of these, whether we're going far enough to get some of the lead that's in the connectors. And I know it's worse in some cities, but I know we probably still have it, but we don't know for sure where, is what I understand.
We have lead service lines. But since 1985, we've had a program that when we come across a lead service at a residential property, the city will replace it from the main to the property line. And we average about 40 a year, so there's not many left. But we have never failed a lead test because we address that through chemistry. At the plant, they test the water several times. We do 130 tests a day. And what we do is our water is slightly depositing, so we're encapsulating that lead. And that way, it doesn't leach out to our customers.
So that's good news to hear. So it's 40 a year we've been doing whenever we do routine kinds of things. Is that how it happens, or do you routinely try and go in and do this?
On average, it's only when we come across them, whether it's for meter installation or a leak. We also replace service lines, residential only, when they are leaking in the public right of way.
So for the residents, or even a commercial apartment building or something, if it's newer, the apartment building's probably already taking care of their share. But when it's older, is there any way we can help people with that, or has there been any way to identify who has it, who doesn't?
We mainly go by age of the resident, but like I said, we do the most expensive half, which is in the public right of way.
But local residents still have it, right? I think.
Yes, there's still some out there, and a lot of residents opt not to replace their side of the service line. Quite a few people use the home test kit for lead, and we also will go out as customer service, take a sample of their water and test it for them for free.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any further questions? I think next up is our sanitary, or no, actually they're all, how do you want to do those?
Are there questions
Are there
related
any
to the
further
other
questions?
funds within utilities?
South Platte Water Renewal then is next. I think I'm finally figuring out how to say that after all these years. Any questions? Take a little time to look at it. Councilmember Martinez?
I just have a question. What is the pilot test program line item?
So pilot testing is where we actually will test different technologies, and we will run different scenarios with chemicals and different types of polymers and things like that to understand whether they actually effectively treat the way we need to. And so it's a process that you do prior to selecting whatever technology that we ultimately implement.
Got it. Makes perfect sense.
Yep.
Councilmember Wink.
I have a statement, not a question. Resilience in our city and across the units of our city is tantamount to us being successful and doing so even more with an emergency management position supporting all of that. And so I'm really grateful to have heard you discuss the plans toward making the plant resilient and thinking ahead and planning ahead. And it's a big job, I know, but it's such a, everything that follows is simpler and easier when you think that far ahead. So thank you for everything you've done for this and since you've been here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Berentine.
I just want to clarify that you have been compliant with all of your emergency management systems and you have a plan in place, and that the plant is held separate and has maintained all of that up to date, correct?
Yes, we are in compliance.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks how you're doing that. Let's see. I don't see any other questions regarding. So the next up is capital requests, right?
Yes, so that concludes the operational and capital discussions regarding the specific requests with the basic capital needs and the operational requests. And we can move forward at your direction with a broader discussion regarding the recommendations that staff brought forth regarding capital funding.
Okay. Questions there. Councilmember Berentine.
I have to admit, I think it might be a little bit premature. I'm really looking forward to Calibre's report in order to go ahead and make a little bit more information, to have a little bit more information on how we might want to move forward. So I think the information and the presentation has been really enlightening, and we'll have some chance to go over some of that. But I don't feel comfortable with coming up with a consensus today or voting today to move forward with anything until we have the rest of the information. Like the mayor said, I think this is fairly early in the process, and we want to make sure that we get all of the rest of the benefit from our $179,000 study from Calibre and get all of that information in, as well as the line item budget, so that we can take a look at that as well. So I'm sure that all that is coming within this next month, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Cuesta, we'll move on to questions in this
As a
section.
point of information, are we seeking a consensus this morning?
No, we're not right now.
Thank you.
But we are asking for questions of some of these and what we want, and we certainly can give some direction if we want, if we know we're, yeah. Do you want consensus today on anything? And we're not voting on anything today. I want the public to be really aware of that.
Again, it's at your pleasure what your discussion is today regarding these options that we've put forth.
Yeah. Let's continue to ask questions about these capital requests and any concerns, interest in diving a little deeper in any of them to the extent that we can today. Councilmember Sierra.
Actually, I would like to go back through the 2020 basic capital request slide.
Do you know what number that is? 20 or 77? Yeah.
So can you explain all the numbers again on the right-hand side? Because I don't think I grasped every aspect of this. So.
Okay. So for the first line item, currently in funds 30 and 31, there's approximately $3 million that is not currently assigned to projects that you have approved as part of the 2019 budget, and also prior budgets, because there are some projects being completed as well. The $1.5 million is a portion of that $3 million remaining balance. We did not want to include the total amount because we'd like to leave, that's a conservative estimate for available funds. The vehicle use tax, building use tax, and Arapahoe County road and bridge tax estimated revenue. When we came forth March 25th and we talked about the revenue estimates, we explained that each of those items receipts are used and specifically put into the public improvement fund. We estimate annually, or previous year's revenues have averaged about $4 million. When I came forth last week and presented the financials through March, we are seeing less receipts. And on an annualized basis, we assume that could be close to $900,000. So even though I'm estimating here $4 million, I expressed that night, and I'll express today, that there's a risk in that $4 million. Could be closer to $3 million. The general fund transfer of the 2018 fund balance net of reserve policy and Tabor reserve requirements. This is also a number that I do share with the council, and that includes the long-term asset reserve of approximately $5 million. So we're using 6.6 as an estimate, but when I shared information with you last week, that number is 7.3. Again, this is a conservative estimate. Should you so choose to use the amount that we have available above the reserve policy, that's a recommendation to you. The general fund transfer of 2019 anticipated savings. We also brought forth a revenue projection for 2019 that was above what our budgeted numbers are, and I think I explained at the time that when we put the budget together, we're almost a full year cycle ahead of when we're actually receiving the revenues, so we do the best we can. Certainly a portion of that are increased marijuana revenues for this year, so than we had anticipated. So we expect that we will have savings on expenditures and also higher revenues, and we're estimating that it's approximately $2 million. Of course, any of these numbers are subject to change because they are estimates, but we feel with reasonable comfort to say, should you choose to fund the basic capital projects, if we use 14.1 million as a number right now, that's a reasonable estimate. And we'll continue through the budgeting cycle, and as we look at things, I'll be coming forth every month and talking about the financials. I can always give an update on this. So as we're making decisions about those specific capital projects, we're making those decisions with the most the most recent, current, best informed decision that you can possibly make. Okay?
Thank you.
Other questions or perspectives that you'd like to be considered in this area of capital? Councilmember Sierra.
So I'll have to go back through the project list. So I guess my question is more towards the bonding. Is it okay to start talk about that aspect of it, or should we wait until there's...
Does anybody have further questions about the capital request list? And we can go between the two. It's fine with me if we want, if it bridges.
And I guess I'll make just a general statement regarding the bonding. So when we're looking at that slide where, the previous slide, the basic capital request, that's not taking into account stormwater. So I think that's the reason why I'm still in favor of moving forward with a bonding issue in 2019. That does take into account stormwater at the very least, at least a portion of it, and also a portion of the Parks and Rec. Or the Englewood Park. So I just knowing that we are going to have to make some type of improvements to the stormwater drains. I think we definitely need to look into that just language for the 2019 ballot, because we won't be able to do it with the funds that we were just talking about on that previous slide.
So can I ask you a question about that? So you're suggesting that before we have the caliber study that we begin.
Well, that's the I think
is it a partial bond that you want for partially taken care of?
Yeah, I think that there should be a partial bond. We know we're going to have to do something for the area that was affected back in July. At the end of this month, if we have to, at the end of the month, we're going to start getting just the information back from Caliber. We can make adjustments at that time if we need to, but at the very least, we know we're going to have to do something to the area that was affected in July. So I do believe that there should be at least a partial of, there was a 20 or 30 million that was recommended, or at least put forth on that slide, on this slide here. So I do think that at least partially we do need to look at stormwater. Not for the entire amount, but I believe at least for 2019 we should look at partial.
Okay. Others have comments or want to bring up something? Councilmember Cuesta.
Sure. If we're going to jump into bonds, the caliber study is certainly a critical piece of information for a lot of this conversation, I think, in deciding which directions we move forward. The tough part about waiting for 2020 on getting funds for stormwater is that to me, that's November 2020. That easily becomes 2021. Who knows how accessible that winter would be? It could be, spring, summer 2021 before we start actually beginning the construction. That's a couple years from now. And I feel like we're just in this risk zone for the next couple years and hoping that we don't have anything, God forbid, anything substantial storm-wise that could impact any one of Englewood's neighborhoods. So I would like some money in the bank. The caliber study could come back and say, we can dedicate X amount of millions here and hopefully get some relief here, as opposed to just this $90 million chunk, and that's the number that's being thrown around, has to be put in this one neighborhood. I still am certainly have the door open on looking to seek a 2019 bond, so I would be in that same camp. I know that if I heard end of May on the caliper study, we're 3 weeks out on that study. I mean, that should be coming back really quickly. We should have that information in front of us. And this might be a city clerk question, or maybe even city manager. What is the deadline again for getting bond language finalized in order to make the ballot?
City Council would have to vote on July 1st to refer a tax issue to the voters. But I would point out that the enterprise funds are supported by fees. It would not necessarily require a vote of the people. So that could happen at another time. We just don't know the rates and fees that would be required based on our capital planning at this point to work with the bonding agencies to figure that out. But we could move forward with that. Once we do have the rate and fee information that we need. But it's not critical for enterprise funds, is my understanding. That we meet that deadline. If we wanted to move forward with a general obligation bond, for instance, to support Parks and Rec or alleys or street reconstruction, those we would have to start work on like Monday.
To the notion of the fees, that does get for me touchier in terms of just telling the citizens, here you go, that is going to be a substantial amount of money. I like the option of having the citizens weighing in, and I know that none of these are perfect paths forward either. And to the 2020 point that you've made repeatedly, the education component and really getting citizens familiar with what they're voting on and just how critical the issues are, it's not lost on me. I mean, I feel like we've got a number of constraints regardless of which way we go. Thank you.
Trying to turn your light off. Thank you. Any further questions or comments? I'm concerned about the public input for this before we even decide to go to this, and I mean, I really regret that we didn't do any kind of polling, which does engage the public. Is that totally out of the question? I've heard that you can do those in 2 weeks, even polling, but that would be.
That would be very difficult in 2 weeks, I have to admit.
2 to 3 weeks. Yeah.
And I think the important part of that is outreach to the community. It's not just, would you vote for $10 or $5 more, that sort of thing, but what are your priorities? What does the community say about where we should be spending our tax dollars?
All right, so do you want to, so June 10th is when we're getting the study, so it is coming to you before then, but June 10th is when we've set aside time to actually have it brought before us. So then we're a few weeks out from, on the June 10th thing, would we be able to come forward with enough information to know whether or not we're ready to put something on to a vote for the part that we can? Do we even think that's possible?
We can certainly try. It'd be tight, but, it's a priority, so we could make that happen.
Or at least have the option to have a conversation that's well informed at that point to decide whether or not to go forward. Yeah. Councilmember Cuesta.
Procedurally speaking, is that a single vote, or is that a first reading, second reading vote?
It's a first reading, second reading.
Would we have enough time if we get that back? I'm not even sure if we would hit it in terms of meetings on the schedule, regular schedule.
I don't think we will.
Thank you.
I mean,
it's technically possible, but very difficult.
July 1 would have to be the first reading, and we could do it if we could get the July 1 reading. Okay. Anything further on any of these? Councilmember Sierra.
Actually, just regarding your comment about, or the mayor's comment about polling, I didn't see anything in there around polling for 2020.
That would just be included in a professional services budget under both finance and the city manager's office.
Councilmember Cuesta.
Mayor, if I may ask you a question.
Yeah.
So with the polling, let's say we did polling and it came back and citizens weren't supporting a bond for stormwater drainage. Would you abandon it at that point?
I would. I think we should wait and line everything up. I have a lot of people that don't understand what this whole issue is because there are a lot of neighborhoods that don't experience anything, and they're wondering what's this about. They didn't even know about it. We have a very small group of people that are in the know. That's what I'm worried about.
So to that point, in more specifically, I should say, abandon it for 2019, really try hard education for 2020, and shoot for a 2020 bond?
Yes.
If I'm understanding that correctly.
That's what I would think we'd need to do. I mean, I think we have money to do something in the short term at a large level if we think we need to do something that's significant. The problem is, and I think Manager Hargrove explained it, we have so many things that depend one on the other. You change a park, you've got storm drainage there, you change this, you've got that there. It's got to be well thought out. This isn't like building a building. I wish it were. I wish it was like doing a police building. It just is much more complicated. I don't want to delay it either. I'm frustrated that we're now. I mean, I wish we had started it, 2 months ago and said, yes, let's do this and just at least get a sense of whether there's an appetite and we start to till the ground of understanding for people, which is what we did for the police building. And but that's a whole lot easier. I get it.
Point of information. Yeah. You said we have a whole lot of money that we can do something with. What?
Well, we have some money to do, not a whole lot. We don't have 80 million, but we do have perhaps some of these that we could take the next step
Okay, and the reason that I asked that, because I've asked this question before, how much of that money can we actually give to it because it's an enterprise fund?
Right,
That's
part
correct.
of the problem.
And that was included. It's a very small amount, but we're researching whether or not we could do loans, between the funds. That's a possibility. And depending upon the type of project it is, if it can be funded through the PIF or the construction fund, we could talk about that. And we talked about the design and construction being part of it for stormwater in this particular.
Thank you. And one of the areas I was thinking about, and we haven't even talked about this, and I don't even know if we can do it, but to have some of this money go towards loan programs, very low income loan programs for areas that do have things that we're at a very low cost. Property owners could do things that are significantly going to help them. But yeah, and I think alleys is going to be a part of it in some areas. It's just so complicated. I wish it was like doing a police building. Councilmember Questa.
Well, and then I'll wrap it up. So it sounds like we don't have the time for polling in 2019. And let's say this does get moved to 2020 and we get polling that doesn't come back positively for us then. Do we still move forward? I would still probably want to put something on the ballot, truth be told. Because, again, I don't know if we can just tighten the belt into $80 million. I don't think that that's going to happen. It's a larger question, so we'll have to deal with not only now, but going down the road. But at some point in time, I think we're going to have to get the bond, regardless of what a poll, or at least put it before the citizens, regardless of what a poll shows.
I totally agree with you.
On the polling.
And the timing of it is, if we could have done polling or he'd been asking me questions, so I'm just responding.
Because you brought up the polling, which I think is valid. And that's what,
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on it?
No, I totally agree with you. I've thought we needed to go for a bond for several years now. There hasn't been an appetite for it. But what I think will happen, if we know in the fall, if let's say we don't do the bond this year, or we don't do it on this particular, maybe we did recreation, I don't know. But let's say that we didn't, and then we start to do some public outreach at a very, a much broader level, and we do a polling and have public outreach as a part of it, and find out they're not interested. I would not be opposed to going and putting it on 2020 still. We just know that we have many more months to till the soil to get to people understanding. This is a complex one. It's not as easy as, yes, we know that the police building is just a mess, and having changed our fire service, people connected that in some ways, like we didn't do the right thing, and so I think it was a different setting for that decision. It was much easier for people to understand and to do. This one's much more complex. It's like putting new pipes in your house. You don't take your friends that come over to say, yeah, I just spent $1,000 on my pipes. How can I show them to you? You can't. It's just not right there in front of you. So that's my take on it. Yes, I would have one yes, no on one, yes on the other. Councilmember Barentine.
I think the conversation that you just had, that you just explained on both sides, going you really want it, but it's very complicated and you want to get all the information, is exactly why we didn't do it 2 months ago, because you want to get a lot more input and a lot more time, and that's what happened. So it's nice to bemoan that 2 months later, but that's exactly the conversation that you ended up with on how complicated it is, and you want to get all the buy-in and educate people. I think Councilmember Questa and I are in a unique position in that I would disagree with you. Maybe in your end of town, they may not understand the issue, but 2 of the districts I think are pretty well versed on what happened for the flood and the need, and so that's half the city. I don't go anywhere where people don't have a comprehension of what happened that day for that area. So I can understand that you're not as involved as he and I are in District 3 and District 4, and they certainly have a huge need and a more pressing issue for what's going on. And I would like to have a conversation about maybe trying to put something on, at least trying to move forward for 2019. However, we spent $179,000 that could have started something based off of information we already had. I want to wait for the information that's coming and and I don't know why we're not getting that until the middle of June at this point, but the fact that it's coming soon, I don't want to make a decision like that in a vacuum. So if there's something that we can do we can jump on it, I'd like to, whatever we need to do to have that conversation as soon as we have it. If we can get that report sooner, because I understand that it's been completed. So if we can have that information, if we can have staff maybe move a little faster on that, we can have that come forward to us, or even have a special meeting in order to vet that information and have at least benefit from the money that we've spent, a huge investment in getting the information, then I think we should consider that.
Thank you. I sure hope that we are not bemoaning having done an important study on floodwater. And I do want to remind people that the flood district is in my district. So it's not as if I don't know about flooding. We've had flooding years after years after years. That is why I have thought we have needed to do a bond long before the freak storm we had in an area that was not clearly in our memory. So it is not, and I understand Councilmember Barentine left the room as I'm saying this, but I'm sure you can hear me. This is something that not enough of our citizens understand. I have 120 homes on the floodplain that are very clearly aware of this, and then a bunch of other folks who don't get it because they don't get flooded. So this has been a raw issue for a number of years. It just got brought into some public's light that never understood it before. So I'm not going to receive that as I'm not interested or that I don't know about flood stuff. And the whole city is my city, not just my district. So we all want to care for all of the people who have had to deal with flooding. It is not an easy thing, and I want to see us do something about it. I want to make sure it's successful. So that's what I'm saying. And I'm disappointed that we didn't get started earlier on it. Yes. So, yeah, go ahead.
If I may, Mayor, make a point of clarification. So we are talking about different types of bonds. One is supported by a revenue bond, and those are the enterprise. And the flexibility that it gives us is that it is supported by a vote from you to increase fees and rates. The issue is we need time to be able to determine what those fees and rates will be in order to secure those bonds, quite frankly. But it does not mean that we need to wait till 2020. Once we have that information, and I'm talking solely about the enterprises now, okay? We could, based on a direction from you, increase fees and rates to support a bond in the interim, once we have all the information.
That's helpful. It seems as though every time we come up to something about increasing something, we kick it down the road. I think there were only two of us that want to do a polling thing and get a lot more information to be ready to do a 2019 bond, and now we're talking about that again. But I'm in favor of us increasing fees and rates too. I think we have to do it all. And if we keep kicking it down the road, the council after November will be still talking about this. We got to do something. So I don't know where your tolerance level is right now, but I'm ready to go for rates and fees increase as well. Any further comments of others?
You're not asking that we decide that
No,
here.
I'm certainly asking for a discussion, though, if you want to. If anybody would like to chime in, anything, Councilmember Cuesta?
To the rates and fees, as we get the numbers back from Calibre, I'm sure we could determine what would that look like, how much, if Calibre says they confirm the 80 million, it'll be 80 million to conduct this. Could we determine how much each user would have their fees increase? Could we quantify that and say, okay, let's say we just bypass the bond and we're going to go straight to fees?
I would like to defer to Director Van Rij because there are multiple things at play, including the cost of service study.
Sure. And so I think the way to consider this is that so the Caliber study is addressing flood-prone areas, from my understanding. And so I'm a little bit out of my area, but I'll talk from a rate and fee perspective based on my experience. And so a way to handle it would be to get the results of that study and then make a general assessment of the rest of the system in a way that can support a rational approach to a rate and fee plan. And so that would be a financial plan. So that'd be understanding what needs to be replaced in the system over the next 10 years, what needs to be fully, what can be rehabbed, where are the areas of flooding that could be addressed. And so once you have that information, then you can build a financial plan. And within that financial plan, you can have bond issuances during that period as designs are done, as construction progresses, and that 10-year financial plan is based on the requirements of the capital need for that 10 years and at what points in time you'd like to issue debt. And so then the rates and fees cover debt service, and then they cover whatever else you're going to cash finance. And so that's where the first step is understanding the scope of the issue, which is the caliber study, and then an additional assessment of the rest of the system. You take that information, you feed it into a financial plan, and then from there you determine what's the way to smooth rates such that you can take care of large projects and not have major spikes. Does that make sense?
It does. So it sounds like we could quantify that.
Yeah, you can quantify it. It takes some time, and you have to understand if we're going to do, the caliber study is very detailed because it's trying to understand flood-prone areas, which is a much more detailed analysis than assessing age of pipe and applying general rules of thumb relative to if you have CMP pipe, it has this many years of design life, and so we understand the age of our pipes, so we can generally assume that X amount of pipes should be replaced or rehabbed a year, and so that would be more of an indicator number to help at least build an initial understanding of what those rates and fees would be needed to support that kind of program. That second piece would be a much higher level, general level analysis, but at least it'll be enough to get started, and it'll be enough to support a rate and fee study. Then from there, as the system becomes, as our understanding of the system becomes more sophisticated, you can do more in-depth condition assessments and things like that to really get more specific about if a particular trunk sewer line, a sanitary or storm sewer line, is in need of rehab, then this is a more specific cost associated to that project. So it's like an iterative process, and this is what you do with planning in all utilities. It's planning should really be done majorly every 5 years, but you look at it every year.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
So what I'm taking from what you just shared with us, that when the caliber study comes back, it's not going to happen overnight, that we're going to have the assessment of how to smooth things out. Is that a correct assessment of what?
Right, because the next step is the financial piece. So this is the first step is and if I'm saying anything wrong, Maria, let me know. But the first step is understanding the scope of what you're trying to address. The second step is the financial piece. That's the rate and fee piece. That's what we're doing at the wastewater plant right now. So we just completed the master plan for the wastewater plant for 20 years to get us all the way through Reg 31. And so the next step is to take all that information, get a financial consultant in to actually build a financial model and associated rates and revenue requirements that then translates into rate and fee recommendations.
Okay, but that's not predicated on a vote of the people.
That is
is
not
predicated on a rate and fee increase, so that's not limited by the time frame.
That is true.
Okay.
And so that's where with the enterprise funds, as Dorothy was saying, you have more flexibility from a timing perspective, because when you understand so let's say it's a 10-year financial plan, the financial consultant will recommend debt issuance dates, and some of it will be based on your debt service requirements, when other debt is retiring, things like that. So you look at it from a comprehensive perspective over the course of a decade or 20 years, depending on how long the bonds take to mature. But that's how you structure the funding such that you can prioritize and attack these projects in a way and fund them along the way. Does that help?
So, yes, so we wouldn't necessarily have to fund it all at once. We would start with because when you start replacing sewer or storm sewer lines, you have to start at the bottom and work your way up the hill. So we would only have to fund the amount that we would get done in 1 year or whatever?
Yeah, and that's what you choose based on what are the associated rate and fee impacts. And so depending on how much revenue is required or how much tolerance there is to raise rates and fees in order to generate that revenue dictates how you prioritize your projects.
Thank you very much.
So that's where the sequence comes in.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, I'm sorry, Councilmember Barentine.
For the rate and fee impacts, and then to go ahead and do that study, what was the timeline again? Because you were already looking at 2020 for that.
Yeah, so can you go back to that slide? So generally, if we were able to get a master plan, so I'm going to talk about water and sewer right now, and then stormwater separately. So if we get a consultant on board by July to help us do that initial assessment from a master planning perspective, and keep in mind that's more high level than maybe a longer term master plan would be. So the master plan we just did at the plant, it's not the first time we've done it, so it was a more in-depth one. This would be enough to get us enough information to understand, okay, so what's the scope of the issue? And then from that scope of the issue, we can then take that information and feed that into a rate and fee study. So the master planning effort would take generally around 6 months, and then you can start the rate and fee study in 2020, in January. And so at that point in time, generally within a few months, if you've got decent information feeding into the rate and fee study, within a few months you've got an indication of what the revenue requirements are going to be and how that financial plan lays out. And so at that point in time, if it says we want to issue debt in 2020, you could vote to issue debt as a council. You could vote to change the rates and fees and then issue debt as a complement to that process. So you set up the revenue so that it's in place, and then you can issue the bonds. And so generally that's probably a decent time frame, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to issue the bonds in November of next year. You could issue them sometime, depending on how quickly the stormwater information could get understood and a fee structure built, you might be able to issue them early next year.
But according to this time frame for Councilmember Cuesta's comment, we would still be looking somewhere at even for the rates and fees to responsibly do that process. Be looking at October. It would be, to your sensitivity on rates and fees and not having it go to the people, would still end up being within a couple of months of it just going to the people to be voting on. So I'm not sure that that's as viable an option, but I appreciate the timeline. Well,
And let me clarify, because if I misspoke here, I'll clarify. I think you could potentially, and I'm not going to commit to this, but potentially be at a point where you might understand it enough to the point where you could look at maybe issuing bonds in the spring. And so that's a 6 months, instead of waiting to the fall and then voting and then issuing the bonds, you're talking about a half a year or more of acceleration of that.
And
so I don't think it's a couple months.
What do you mean by that?
So
it's for stormwater.
For stormwater. Specific to
issuing the bonds so that people would vote on it?
No, so you issue out, the enterprise fund issues bonds on their own. So this council decides what bond issuance you want to move forward
Right, and that's what I was addressing, was that I understand, I believe Councilmember Cuesta's sensitivity and certainly mine of bypassing the voters and us imposing that cost on them without their voice, whereas if we use this timeline, we would probably already be at that place. I understand that looks expeditious for you, but I mean, my bosses would be left out of that mix. So that's what we're trying to balance out, is whether we would take that, bypass the voters and do it through a fee increase, or whether we would end up with the same timeline that would put us probably more in better stewardship and communication with our community to go ahead and let them vote. That's what I'm trying to do the difference between. I think I understand it.
And I'm not sure that I'm clear, actually, because so it's not me personally that it benefits me. We're trying to help accelerate this to the degree, because it is a priority. And so the issue with the enterprise funds is the enterprise funds issue bonds out of the fund, and this council is who actually votes on what bonds you issue. It's not, they aren't ones that you send, they don't go on a vote. And so,
I understand.
yeah, they're not required to go to a vote of the people.
But the people are paying for it, and that's
Absolutely.
what I'm trying to be sensitive to. So I understand the division for you. I wasn't saying that you would want to bypass the voter. I'm just more sensitive to it. You're giving options, and I'm trying to weigh the difference between those two, not whether you have a preference on how this council does it or not, but that you're providing us with the options. I appreciate that.
Sure. And as a point of information, you mentioned it could be, if this was moving potentially expeditiously, it could be spring. You mean spring of 2020, correct?
Spring of
Not
2020.
Not current spring.
Yeah, spring of 2020. And I want to clarify one thing. I am not bond counsel. This is my understanding as it relates to when I've been in this process in other utilities. So I'm trying to be as helpful as possible based on my knowledge.
Appreciate it, and that's probably a good statement to make for your own self.
So I think there's two elements here, and I tried to go over this when we talked about this slide earlier. So this is the caliber study, the flood-prone areas. So we know that number. So that's A. So if B is the non-flood-prone areas, we still have to figure out that number for B. Add A and B, and then determine how the rates get set.
Can I get a point of clarification? How do we know the number? We don't have the study.
Well, placeholder, yeah. And we'll get that A number within the next few weeks. So the study is not completed yet. That was just a placeholder. So the intent then, as Peter said, adding those two numbers together plus our administrative costs would add up, okay, here's what we need to get to for a rate and fee, and then we calculate the bond rates or the bond amounts based on how aggressive we want to take on those projects.
Very helpful. I think there's a lot to digest on this about, I think the differences in funding gets some in the public confused as to what is required to go to vote, what isn't, when would we choose not to, and then the other three areas of street maintenance and alleys and parks obviously are larger, big view public understanding. Probably that would be something we'd ask them for. So yeah, there's a lot here to try and figure out, but in the meantime, I guess I do have a question about, we're going to get the caliber study. Will parts of that be things that we could fund now from this $14 million, that we know we would get started on some things without having to go to the rate and fee increases, or doing something with alleys and streets that might mitigate, and even parks for water retention? So I see all of those as so interrelated. It's just not just recreation, and that's parks. You're right. Parks can be a place where we figure out better retention, and we don't want to make all of our parks a retention pond, but we have better opportunities to do things with that land. So anyway.
Yes, so I believe the upper right-hand quadrant of those four options that we laid out did include $3 million for a prioritized stormwater improvement project, the upper right-hand quadrant there. So we have not, again, received that data, but we're hopeful that there's a project that would fit within that, that's a relatively high priority that we could address right now. Similarly, if we went forward, as Mr. Lee mentioned, there's $1 million to look at initial construction drawings or design drawings for several parks. We'd be incorporated into that process to look at how do we make, if the need is there, how do we address, let's say, how do we start to talk about putting design elements into that park so that it's planned from the very beginning if the need is there for detention of some sort.
Great. Any further questions or comments? And I also would invite you to think on the big picture of it all. Is there anything that's concerning, something you want to get more information on? And if you don't think of it now, then be sure to email it to Director Hargrove. Yeah, okay. Councilmember Sierra.
It's not a question regarding this, but it is a question regarding the Title 16 within community development. So should I do that now, or should I wait until we have further questions about this aspect?
Is there anything further on this? Okay, go ahead.
So again, just to start the discussion regarding Title 16. So I raised that council request on Monday night where I did want staff, primarily Director DeAndre, at least as a lead, to start looking at modifications to Title 16 that would hold builders and developers more into, one example would be taking site pictures prior and then after to bring it back to current state. So those are the type of recommendations I'm looking for from planning and zoning as well as staff. And so it sounds like City Manager Hargrove would like to get input from council whether or not that is worth staff's time. And I think I believe I asked for recommendations by August 31st. So I guess that's the conversation I would like to have right now, to just see if council is okay with those type of recommendations coming back.
Any perspective on that from others? You're talking about a very specific kind of issue, aren't you? It's not like a whole redo of 16. It's about trying to find the places where we can hold developers accountable for.
Yeah, and I can't remember if erosion control was also an aspect of it. But just obviously we saw what the state of some of the alleys were over the winter. If there's anything that we could do to improve Title 16 that would hold builders more responsible for keeping the alleys in a pristine state, that's really what I'm looking for in terms of the initial scope of this Title 16.
Go ahead.
If I may, Mayor. And I didn't address it in my slides because this is actually a 2019 initiative. As you may recall, after the flood event, we talked about upgrading our drainage standards to be in alignment more with other agencies in the metro area, meaning that what triggers, whether redevelopment or new development, what triggers the need for detention and water quality. And those standards are outdated compared to other communities. So we're in that process right now, and we're also updating all of our construction standards and specifications. We'll be bringing those to council for ratification probably in the mid to late summer. So we're hoping to address some of your issues that way as well, just so you know that.
Does that seem to satisfy what you're...
Well, I just wanted to make sure, so will that satisfy all the issues, or are there aspects of Title 16 that we do need to clarify in order to make it easy, better for us to enforce? So
yeah,
that would be the aspect of it that I want to make sure is also included within this time frame.
I think we'll address some of the technical issues, but to your point, yeah, where there's more coordination or requirements of the contractors themselves would probably be more appropriate through the Title 16 process.
If I may.
Go ahead.
Unless otherwise directed, I'm very comfortable with staff moving forward. I just wanted you to know that we will be working on that. And by the end of August, we ought to have some pretty good idea about how we're moving forward. We will have to involve planning and zoning in parts of it, so there'll be some communication, but we're happy to make that a priority.
Councilmember Cuesta.
Are you seeking consensus on moving that forward?
Yeah, I think what she's asking for is one person asked for something Monday night, and we have this sort of general rule that one person just doesn't get everything done if it takes a lot of research. So are any of us against the moving forward on that? It's part of what they were going to do anyway. It's just that that's what it is. Councilmember Cuesta.
Yes, I'm supportive of that moving forward. Developer accountability is critical, and it's good that's coming to discussion. Thank you.
Any other, no, don't go. Councilmember Martinez.
I'm also supportive of moving forward on that.
Okay, and Councilmember Wing.
I'm supportive of moving forward as well.
Okay, and Councilmember Barentine.
I'm just uncomfortable using the budget discussion to discuss very specific issues like this.
Yeah. So I think what we're doing is just asking for consensus to keep moving on something that is related to budget, but I get it. Mayor Pro Tem.
So then can we also move forward to get consensus on what one council member has already asked, that could we get a copy of the line item budget for 2019 currently, so that we can work through some of these changes?
Thank you. As I mentioned at the beginning, at the mayor's request, it will be attached to the minutes of this. So early next week, you will have the 2019 line on the budget.
Thank you very much.
Yes. One of the things that with the line item that's kind of weird is we actually do have sort of a line item, but the way in which it's laid out is not very readable for some, and go into the system, not iCompass, but the I always forget to get the two of them mixed up, but that this will be easier for some people to read it and compare and contrast. Councilmember Sierra.
I was just going to ask, we also get the 5-year in Excel, the 5-year capital projects that's part of the presentation. Can I get the Excel format as well?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Barentine.
When we get the line item, will it just include the history to date so far as well? Or will it just be the line item budget? The line item budget exists right now, not just, we've gone over this on how it is on the system, but is it just going to be the budget that exists currently right now for 2019, or will it include the expenditures to date so far?
So the plan was to include the budget as it was. We can talk as a team what we can provide for 2019 beyond what's been provided already, which is just a look at the departments as it was in the financial information that I shared last week. So I believe that information is available on OpenGov, but perhaps it's not easily.
I've been through the training. I've been through the meeting. We all agreed that there were some problems with the portal and trying to get that information. So the identifying it as a line item budget is a little bit of a stretch, but I appreciate that you're offering this, and I'm sure that that we can tie numbers from your financial reports into that budget if that's what we want to see where we're at, that it'll be tieable to that. Okay.
So let me get back with the team. At a minimum, you'll have the 2019 budget by line item attached to the minutes, and let me take into further consideration your second request.
If anything, if someone could take the line item and then go back into OpenGov and be able to find it there, if you have to drill down for that, maybe if it's easily taggable that way, I don't know. But all right, I know this is a stretch for trying to figure it out in a traditional model, but
It's certainly okay. It's information that's available, right?
Folks, I think that might be it. Are we? Yeah. All right. So any further questions that you might have as you're thinking about this, be sure to email. Do you want to both of you or?
Actually, we were thinking that treating budget-specific requests as separate from a council request, and those could all go to Director Sabata.
Okay.
And then all the answers would be provided in sort of a budget update with the council newsletter every week so that it's accessible to the public and all of council, if that's acceptable.
That sounds great. Do you want to be CC'd on that?
Oh, sure. I love to read everything.
Okay. I just like to CC you when I'm directly responding to one of your directors.
No, that's
just
fine.
staying in line with what we've agreed to. All right, great. Thank you, everybody, for your attention and time, and thank you all your staff to come on a Saturday and do this as well. All right, go enjoy the rest of the weekend.